Hey guys, tonight we step quietly into a narrow London room where the air smells faintly of coal, smoke and damp wool, and you are already awake before the sun thinks about rising. The ceiling hangs low above your head, stained with years of candle soot, and somewhere beyond the thin wall a neighbour coughs in a way that suggests lungs made mostly of regret. This is Victorian London, and you are a working brother, which already tells you more about your future than any horoscope ever could. You probably won't survive this with your modern expectations of personal space, warm showers or weekends. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is, because somewhere out there it's 3 in the morning and you're bravely fighting sleep. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You lie on a straw mattress that has seen better centuries, sharing it with one brother who radiates heat like a poorly insulated furnace. Another brother sleeps on the floor nearby, wrapped in a threadbare blanket that once might have been blue, though historians still argue whether it was originally blue or simply grey from the beginning. Your room is no bigger than a modern walk-in closet, except with fewer shoes and more existential dread. Morning in Victorian London does not arrive gently. It announces itself with the groan of cartwheels, the distant whistle of steam, and the sharp cry of a milk seller who sounds personally offended that anyone is still asleep. You blink, already tired, because rest here is more of a rumor than a habit. The window is crusted with grime, letting in light the color of weak tea, and you take a moment to remember where you are and why your back hurts in places you didn't know existed. This is your normal. You are perhaps 13, maybe 14, though age is flexible when birth records are suggestions rather than facts. Mainstream historians agree that thousands of children and teenagers like you formed the backbone of Britain's industrial workforce, often starting full-time labor before their voices finished changing. A quirky tidbit passed around in later years claims some factories kept cats on payroll to control rats and improve morale, which means somewhere out there a feline once earned more respect than you. You sit up slowly, careful not to kick your brother in the ribs. The air feels cold and damp, clinging to your skin, and you already smell the factory on yourself, even though you haven't left yet. Coal dust has a way of traveling through walls, through clothes, through dreams. You rub your eyes, feeling grit that no amount of blinking ever fully removes. From the next room comes the soft shuffle of your mother, already awake, already calculating how to stretch yesterday's bread into today's breakfast. Family here is less about warmth and more about logistics. Everyone must move in the right order at the right time, or the whole fragile system collapses. You are not woken by an alarm clock, but by the simple understanding that lateness means lost wages, and lost wages mean hunger. You stand joints stiff and pull on trousers that once belonged to an older cousin. The fabric scratches your legs, and you briefly imagine what it might feel like to own clothes that fit. Then you remember this is not that kind of story. You splash water from a chipped basin onto your face, the liquid so cold it feels like a personal insult, and watch the grime swirl away before settling back again, as if the dirt itself has signed a long-term lease. Outside, dawn creeps over rooftops that look like rows of broken teeth. Smoke already rises from chimneys, blurring the sky into a permanent overcast. London, in this era, produces so much coal smoke that some historians estimate the city created its own microclimate, a local weather pattern officially known as miserable. You step carefully over a sleeping dog on the stairwell, because even animals understand conserving energy here. As you move through the corridor, you pass doorways where other families stir, the quiet rustle of shared hardship. Someone hums a hymn off key. Someone else mutters about the price of bread. The building smells of boiled cabbage, damp wood, and the faint metallic tang of industry, a scent that will follow you all the way to your grave. In the yard below, your brothers gather, each of you carrying the same thin bundle of lunch, the same half-sleepy expression, the same understanding that today will be exactly like yesterday, only slightly longer. You exchange nods rather than words. Conversation takes energy, and energy is something you budget carefully. One brother yawns so widely you briefly worry his jaw might detach. Another jokes that if he falls asleep standing, the foreman will probably charge him rent. That's joke number one, by the way. Gentle humor is a survival tool here, as essential as bread or boots. You smile, because smiling costs nothing. And because pretending things are lighter than they are helps you lift them. The street outside greets you with puddles reflecting smokestacks and the pale hint of sunrise. Horse manure competes with coal ash for dominance of the pavement, and you navigate the obstacle course with the practiced steps of someone who has done this since childhood. Somewhere, a bell tolls the quarter hour, and you feel it not as sound but as pressure, pushing you forward. Historians still argue whether early rising improved workers' discipline or simply shortened their lives more efficiently. What is certain is that your day begins long before the factory doors open, because preparing to work is itself unpaid labor. You carry a tin mug, dented but loyal, and a crust of bread that has the resilience of building material. Breakfast is optional, punctuality is not. As you walk, you notice the Thames in the distance, sluggish and brown, carrying secrets no one wants back. A fringe rumor among workers claims the river once ran clear, which is either nostalgia or a fairy tale, depending on who you ask. You personally suspect rivers, like people, are born hopeful and slowly learn better. The factory looms ahead, a brick giant with windows like tired eyes. Smoke curls from its stacks in lazy spirals, promising warmth and wages and the slow grinding of bones. You pause for half a breath, because even courage needs a moment to tie its shoes. Around you, other boys gather, shoulders hunched, breath fogging in the cool air. This is the first lesson of the day. Waking is not the same as beginning. Your real day starts here, in front of iron gates that creak like they're clearing their throats to shout at you. You are still mostly a child, still dreaming sometimes of fields and rivers and stories where the hero escapes. But for now, you are a Victorian brother worker, and morning has claimed you again. The bell inside rings once, sharp and impatient. You straighten your collar, such as it is, and step forward with your brothers, into noise, into heat, into the long familiar rhythm that will carry you through the hours. And somewhere, very far in the future, someone listening from a quiet bedroom will think this sounds exhausting, and they will be absolutely correct. You file forward with your brothers, boots scuffing the stone threshold, and the factory door yawns open to swallow you all at once. Warm air rushes out, thick with oil and dust, and for a moment it feels like stepping into the breath of some enormous animal. Inside, everything hums, clatters, and shivers with motion. The sound is not loud in the dramatic sense, it is constant, which is worse. It seeps into your skull and rearranges your thoughts until silence itself feels suspicious. But before the machines truly claim you, there is the small matter of breakfast, which happens less at a table and more in a corner, standing, balancing crumbs like precious cargo. You gather near a wall where light sneaks in through a grimy window, forming a pale rectangle on the floor that everyone pretends is cheerful. Your mother's bread emerges from pockets broken into careful pieces, because sharing is easier than fairness. Family here is not a sentimental word. It is a working arrangement. You know exactly how fast each brother moves, how long each can go without rest, who is likely to argue with a foreman, and who will swallow anger like medicine. Mainstream historians point out that families often worked together in factories because it simplified hiring and supervision. A fringe tidbit, whispered in break rooms decades later, suggests some mill owners preferred siblings because they fought less with strangers and more with each other. which saved management the trouble. You lean against the wall and chew slowly, savoring every dry bite, as if it might be the last interesting thing to happen today. One brother steals a crumb from another, which starts a silent war of glares that lasts the entire meal. Joke number 1 arrives when the youngest mutters that if bread gets any harder, they'll need chisels instead of teeth. You snort quietly, because laughing too loudly before work marks you as reckless. Around you, other families cluster in similar formations, each group orbiting its own worries. Mothers smooth collars, fathers adjust caps, older sisters murmur reminders about fingers and belts and staying alert. There is tenderness here, but it hides behind efficiency. You notice how everyone touches briefly, shoulders, sleeves, hands, small gestures that say more than speeches ever could. Historians still argue whether family labor strengthened bonds or simply made poverty more efficient. From where you stand, it feels like both. You trust your brothers more than anyone else in this building, but you also know they are your competition for better tasks, for favor, for survival. Brotherhood, you are learning, is complicated. The bell rings again, sharper now, and breakfast evaporates. Crumbs vanish into mouths, mugs into pockets, expressions into masks of readiness. You and your brothers line up instinctively, tallest to shortest, because order reduces questions, and questions reduce wages. A foreman strides past, boots polished to a shine that feels almost offensive, clipboard tucked under his arm like a weapon. He glances at your group, nods once, and moves on. Approval here is brief and mostly silent. You exchange looks with your eldest brother, who gives the tiniest shrug, meaning today you are still employed, and that is enough to celebrate internally. Joke number 2 arrives when someone behind you whispers that the foreman smells like pomade and disappointment. You almost laugh, then remember discipline, and convert it into a cough. Your station today is near the carding machines, where raw cotton becomes something approaching thread. The machines loom like complicated insects, belts twitching, gears clicking, metal teeth flashing. You take your place beside your brothers, each of you assigned a narrow strip of responsibility that will fill the next 12 hours. Teamwork here is not inspirational. It is necessary to avoid injury. You learn early how to read each other without words. A raised eyebrow means slow down. A tilted head means a belt is slipping. A quick intake of breath means trouble. Mainstream accounts describe this as informal coordination, which sounds polite and tidy. In reality, it is survival choreography. As the machines start, the room fills with a vibration that travels up your legs and into your chest. Dust floats in the air like lazy snow, settling on hair, sleeves, eyelashes. A quirky rumor among workers claims cotton dust improves complexion, which you suspect was invented by someone who had never seen your face after a long shift. Time here behaves strangely. Minutes stretch and compress, folding in on themselves. You count revolutions, not hours. Occasionally you catch your brother's eye and share a look that says, "Yes, we are still here," and "Yes, this is still happening." Joke number 3 slips out when you gesture at the machine and mouth. "She's in a mood today," as if the equipment has opinions. Your brother smirks, which is as close to joy as you'll get before noon. You think about home already. About the narrow bed, the coughing neighbor, the window that barely opens. You realize family is not just who you sleep beside, but who stands beside you while metal spins inches from your hands. There is comfort in that, thin but real. A bell signals the true start of labor, and the last scraps of quiet vanish. The foreman's voice cuts through the din. Listing tasks, corrections, warnings. You bend forward, fingers poised, eyes alert, breath measured. Whatever you were before this moment, child, dreamer, sibling, you are now part of a machine made of people. And yet, as the gears turn and the belts whip and the dust swirls, you feel your brother's presence close by, steady and familiar. In this place that eats hours and patience, family is your only soft edge. You grip it carefully, because softness here is rare. The shift releases you briefly from the machines, not as mercy but as necessity, and you spill back into the street with your brothers, blinking like creatures borrowed from underground. The factory doors close behind you with a thud that sounds suspiciously final, and for a moment the outside air feels almost extravagant. Cooler, thinner, carrying hints of river damp and horse sweat instead of oil and cotton lint. You inhale deeply, then immediately regret it, because Victorian London has never heard of freshness. This walk is short, only a few streets between home and labour, yet it contains the entire geography of your world. You step around puddles that reflect chimneys like upside down forests. Brick walls loom on either side, close enough that voices bounce back at you, turning private murmurs into public announcements. Somewhere overhead, laundry flaps like tired flags, surrendering to gravity and soot. Mainstream historians describe industrial-era streets as multifunctional spaces, which is a polite way of saying everything happens here. Commerce, gossip, crime, prayer, and occasional livestock all share the same narrow lanes. A quirky tidbit passed among workers claims one alley nearby once hosted a spontaneous chicken race organized by bored apprentices, though historians still argue whether that story is true or simply the result of too much gin and imagination. You walk with your brothers in a loose formation, close enough to share warmth but far enough to avoid stepping on heels. Conversation drifts in and out, light and practical. One of you complains about a loose button. Another wonders aloud if the foreman's mustache is real or some kind of experimental attachment. Joke number 1 lands when someone suggests the mustache is alive and applying for a promotion. You smile, because it is easier than thinking about promotions that will never include you. The street vendors are already active, calling out prices with voices trained to cut through steam and noise. Apples, eels, hot pies whose contents are best not investigated too closely. You glance at a pie, then at your nearly empty pocket, and continue walking. Desire here is something you learn to acknowledge politely and then ignore. Children dart past you, some younger than you, some already wearing the hollow-eyed look of future co-workers. A girl skips rope near a doorway, counting softly, while her mother watches from inside with the distracted gaze of someone doing 3 calculations at once. Historians still argue whether childhood in this era was truly shorter or simply less documented. From your perspective, it feels both brief and endless, like a pause you barely remember having. You pass a lamppost where notices are pasted in crooked layers. Job offers, lost dogs, political slogans, a crude drawing of a cat wearing a top hat. The paper peels at the corners, flapping gently, whispering promises and warnings no one has time to read. A fringe rumor among apprentices claims one of these notices once advertised a job on the moon, which was either a joke or early science fiction. You hope it was serious. The closer you get to the Mill District, the more the streets narrow, as if the city itself is funneling you toward work. Smoke thickens overhead, turning the sky into a permanent evening. You notice how even the birds here sound tired, their calls short and businesslike. You briefly imagine being a pigeon, because at least pigeons get to sit down occasionally. Your brothers walk ahead, silhouettes against the haze, and you study their backs, the familiar slope of shoulders, the slight limp in one leg that never quite healed. Family before breakfast, you think, and after, and always. You know their rhythms as well as your own. The way one hums when anxious, another clenches his fists when concentrating. These small details are your map through the day. Joke number 2 arrives when the youngest points at a particularly thick cloud of smoke and says, "Look, the sky is boiling again." You nod solemnly, as if weather regularly cooks itself here. Humor is easier than admitting the air hurts your throat. You turn a corner and nearly collide with a delivery cart, the driver swearing with creative efficiency. You apologize automatically, even though you are not at fault, because apologies are cheaper than arguments. The horse attached to the cart looks at you with an expression that suggests it, too. is reconsidering its career choices. Mainstream records note that workers often lived within walking distance of factories, reducing lateness and increasing control. A fringe tidbit claims some mill owners arranged housing specifically so workers would pass the foreman's house every morning, a subtle reminder of hierarchy. Historians still argue whether this was intentional design or simply convenient real estate. As you approach the factory again, the building grows larger, darker, more inevitable. Windows reflect nothing but smoke. The walls radiate stored heat like a stove that never quite cools. You slow slightly, savoring the last moments of movement not dictated by belts and levers. Your brothers fall silent, each retreating into private thoughts. You think about the day ahead, the endless afternoon that waits behind those doors, the repetition that will blur hours into one long motion. You also think, briefly, about things you have never seen: green fields, quiet lakes, places where silence exists naturally. Then the factory whistle sounds, long and commanding, and fantasy evaporates. Joke number 3 sneaks in when someone mutters, "At least the whistle's punctual," which is true, and therefore funny in the bleakest possible way. You grin, then straighten your collar again, habit more than necessity. The gate creaks open, and you join the flow of bodies moving inward, boots echoing on stone. The street behind you continues without pause, vendors calling, children playing, life rearranging itself around industry. Ahead, the machines wait, patient and hungry. As you cross the threshold, you glance once more at your brothers, a quick inventory present, breathing, moving. Good, that will have to be enough. You step inside, and the outside world fades, replaced by heat, noise, and the long, grinding promise of the day. The moment you pass fully inside, sound takes possession of you. Not the dramatic crash of thunder, but a layered, unbroken roar made of clacks, hisses, whirs, and the rhythmic slap of belts against pulleys. The first bell has already done its job, summoning everyone to attention, but the second bell is the real master. It rings sharp and metallic, slicing through the noise like a knife through bread, and every spine in the room straightens in reflex. You and your brothers hurry to your stations, guided by memory more than sight. Light here is a suggestion rather than a fact, filtered through windows coated in soot and dust. Shafts of grey illumination fall across spinning wheels, making the moving parts look briefly beautiful, like mechanical ballet. Mainstream historians often remark on the visual poetry of early factories, which is an interesting opinion usually held by people not standing this close to exposed gears. A quirky tidbit circulates among older workers. Someone once trained a parrot to shout, "Mind your fingers," whenever the belt sped up. The parrot, according to legend, lived longer than 3 supervisors and retired comfortably. Historians still argue whether this bird ever existed, but you secretly hope it did, because the idea of an avian safety officer is comforting. Orders begin immediately. A foreman strides down the aisle, calling out adjustments, corrections, warnings. His voice is practiced, efficient, carrying authority without strain. You barely look at him, because eye contact invites comment, and comment invites attention, and attention rarely improves your day. Instead, you focus on the machine in front of you, its steady motion both threat and companion. Your task is simple in theory: guide the fibers, clear the jams, keep the rhythm. In practice, it requires constant alertness, because a moment's distraction can end a career, or at least a finger. Mainstream records show that industrial accidents were common, though underreported, because paperwork is easier than compassion. A fringe rumor claims some factories kept spare prosthetic hooks on site, which is either preparation or dark humor, depending on your mood. You settle into position, shoulders slightly hunched, knees bent just enough to react quickly. The floor vibrates beneath your boots, a subtle reminder that the building itself is in motion. Dust floats in the air, catching in your hair, your lashes, the corners of your mouth. You taste cotton and oil, a flavor combination that will never trend, Joke number 1 arrives when your brother leans close and shouts over the din. If this machine gets any louder, it'll start giving speeches. You grin, because imagining the loom campaigning for better conditions is absurd and therefore delightful. Then you return to work, fingers moving with practiced care. Time begins to stretch, minutes dissolve into motion. You count cycles without meaning to, your body syncing with the machine until it feels less like labor and more like enforced meditation. Occasionally, you glance sideways to check on your brothers. Small nods exchanged, silent assurances that all is still well. Historians still argue whether factory discipline improved efficiency or merely crushed initiative. From where you stand, discipline feels like gravity constant, invisible, impossible to negotiate with. You notice how everyone moves within narrow boundaries, careful not to attract notice, careful not to slow the flow. A sudden screech cuts through the noise as a belt slips. The room tenses collectively, dozens of heads turning in the same instant. A mechanic rushes in, tools clanking, hands flying. The belt is reset within moments, crisis contained. But your heart takes longer to slow. You exhale, realizing you had been holding your breath. Quirky stories circulate about machines developing personalities, some benevolent, some malicious. One loom, they say, refused to start on Mondays out of principle. Historians still argue whether workers projected emotions onto equipment as coping, or whether the machines truly sensed resentment. You personally suspect it is easier to blame metal than fate. Joke number 2 sneaks in when someone mutters, "Even the belt needed a rest," which earns a ripple of soft laughter, quickly swallowed by noise. Humor here travels in flashes, quick and fragile. The foreman passes again, eyes scanning, noting speed, posture, output. He pauses near your station, watches for a few seconds that feel like an entire childhood, then moves on. Approval without comment. You relax by a fraction, muscles unclenching. Hours drift. Sweat beads on your forehead, trickles down your neck, dampens your collar. The air grows heavier as heat builds, and you begin to understand why some workers tie damp cloths around their throats. Mainstream accounts note that ventilation was often poor, though. Poor feels generous when you're breathing lint. Joke number 3 arrives when your youngest brother mouths, "I think I'm becoming part of the machine," and flexes his fingers dramatically. You nearly laugh aloud, then remember discipline again and convert it into a cough. Becoming part of the machine is uncomfortably, not entirely metaphorical. You notice the rhythm changing slightly as the morning advances, the tempo quickening as demand increases. The machines do not tire, and therefore neither, apparently, should you. You adjust, keeping pace, letting the motion carry you forward. Somewhere, another bell rings faintly, marking time for someone else, in some other part of the building. For you, time is measured in revolutions, in cleared jams, in the number of times you blink to clear dust from your eyes. You feel hunger already, a quiet ache reminding you that bread was not enough. Historians still argue whether early industrial workers developed a unique sense of time, one tied more to machinery than clocks. Standing here, you think they are right. The machine decides when you start, when you stop, how fast you move, how much you earn. It is your loudest teacher. As the noise continues unbroken, you let your mind drift just enough to survive. You think about the street, the puddles, the boiling sky. You think about home, the narrow bed, the coughing neighbor. You think about nothing at all, which is sometimes the greatest luxury. The bell that will release you for a short break feels impossibly distant. Until then, you keep moving, guiding fibers, clearing jams, breathing dust, standing beside your brothers in a cathedral of noise. The first orders of the day echo on, and you obey not because you want to, but because stopping is not an option. When the foreman finally gestures you closer, you step away from your station with a mixture of relief and suspicion. Being summoned usually means either promotion or trouble, and promotion is rare enough to feel mythical. Today, it turns out, is education. You are to learn a new machine slightly newer, slightly faster, and significantly more capable of removing parts of you if offended. The instructor is an older worker with hands like carved wood and eyes permanently narrowed from decades of lint. He does not introduce himself, because names here matter less than competence. Instead, he taps the metal casing and begins explaining in a voice honed to carry over machinery. You lean in, listening carefully, because misunderstanding instructions can cost more than wages. Mainstream historians agree that most factory training was informal, passed worker to worker, with little written guidance. A quirky tidbit claims one mill briefly tried illustrated manuals, but workers used them to wrap sandwiches, which ended the experiment. Historians still argue whether better training reduced accidents or simply made them more predictable. You study the levers, the belts, the exposed teeth that flash as the wheel turns. The older man demonstrates each movement slowly, deliberately, as if teaching a nervous horse to accept a saddle. "Never cross here," he shouts, pointing. "Always watch that belt." His fingers move with surprising grace, proof that survival teaches its own choreography. You nod, committing every detail to memory. This machine runs faster than your old one, promising higher output and, theoretically, slightly better pay. It also promises greater risk, which is not mentioned in the wage calculation. You glance back at your brothers, who watch with interest and a hint of envy. Advancement here is communal news. Joke number 1 arrives when the instructor mutters, "She bites if you're careless," patting the machine affectionately. You whisper back, "So do my brothers," which earns you a rare grin. Humor, even whispered, feels like rebellion. Your turn comes. You place your hands where instructed, heart thudding, aware of every inch of exposed skin. The machine surges to life faster than you expect, and you flinch before forcing yourself to relax. Movements must be smooth, confident, because hesitation is what traps fingers. At first, everything feels wrong. The rhythm is unfamiliar, the timing slightly off. Fibers snag, tension builds, and the instructor intervenes with a quick, practiced motion. "Feel it," he says, tapping the frame. "It tells you what it wants." You resist the urge to point out that machines wanting things is unsettling. Historians still argue whether skilled machine operators developed an intuitive connection with their equipment or simply memorized patterns. Standing here, you suspect it is both. You begin to sense subtle changes in vibration, tiny shifts in sound that signal trouble before it arrives. Your body learns faster than your mind. A fringe rumor among workers claims some machines were named and spoken to kindly, resulting in fewer breakdowns. You briefly consider introducing yourself, then decide that talking to metal in public might damage your reputation. Joke number 2 sneaks in when your youngest brother mouths exaggerated encouragement from across the aisle, flexing as if you are lifting weights. You nearly laugh, then refocus, because laughter near moving belts is a career-limiting choice. Gradually, the motion settles. Your hands move with increasing confidence, guiding fibers, adjusting tension, clearing minor snarls before they become disasters. Sweat beads on your forehead, but this time from concentration rather than heat. The instructor nods once, a small but meaningful endorsement, then steps away. You are alone with the machine now, newly responsible, newly visible. The foreman glances over, noting the change. Visibility, is double-edged. It brings opportunity and scrutiny in equal measure. Mainstream accounts note that skilled workers could sometimes negotiate slightly better wages. Though better often meant pennies rather than miracles. Hours pass as you practice, mistakes shrinking, movements smoothing. You feel a strange pride growing, cautious but real. This is not freedom, but it is mastery, and mastery is rare here. You catch your brother's eye and give a subtle nod. "I'm managing." He nods back. "Good." Joke number 3 arrives when the machine emits an odd clatter and you whisper, "That didn't sound encouraging." Your brother pantomimes a priest giving last rites, which makes you bite your lip to suppress laughter. The machine, mercifully, continues without incident. Dust thickens as afternoon approaches, coating your sleeves in pale fuzz. You wipe your brow with the back of your hand, leaving a smear that will take days to fade. You think about how learning here is never abstract, every lesson has weight, noise, and consequences. Historians still argue whether industrial work fostered pride or merely endurance. From your perspective, pride sneaks in sideways, hiding inside competence. You do not love this machine, but you respect it, and it respects you just enough to keep you intact. When the bell finally signals a short pause, you step back, flexing stiff fingers, and exhale a breath you did not realize you were holding. You have learned something today, not from books or teachers, but from steel and motion and fear. It will not change your life, but it might preserve it, which feels like a fair trade. You rejoin your brothers, exchanging quiet updates, and for a moment you are not just enduring. You are progressing. In this world, that is almost daring. You return to the line with new awareness, carrying the invisible weight of your upgraded responsibilities. The factory floor feels subtly different now, as if the machines are watching you with fresh expectations. You take your place among your brothers, but something has shifted. Not status exactly, no one bows, but a slight recalibration in how others glance your way, measuring competence the way merchants measure cloth. Hierarchy here is not announced, it is absorbed. You know who outranks whom by posture, by proximity to foreman, by who dares to speak without being addressed. At the top stand the managers, rarely seen, mythical figures rumored to possess offices with actual chairs. Below them, overseers and foremen patrol like migratory birds, always circling. Then come the skilled operators, then the general hands, and finally the children, quick and expendable. Mainstream historians often describe this as a rigid class structure transplanted indoors. A quirky tidbit claims 1 mil once painted lines on the floor to indicate social rank, which ended abruptly when everyone ignored them and tripped anyway. Historians still argue whether hierarchy improved efficiency or simply provided someone to blame. You observe the foreman more closely now. One walks with hands clasped behind his back, expression carved from disapproval. Another chews constantly, as if masticating stress. They speak little, but when they do, the room bends toward their voices. Authority here is less about shouting and more about presence, a gravitational pull that rearranges behavior. Your brothers operate at different rungs of this ladder. The eldest has earned a measure of trust, occasionally tasked with supervising a row when someone is absent. The youngest remains at the bottom, fetching tools, sweeping lint, learning patience by necessity. You hover somewhere between newly skilled, newly noticed, and slightly uneasy about both. Joke number 1 arrives when the youngest whispers, "If I sweep any more lint, I'll qualify as furniture," which earns a quiet chuckle. You reply, "At least furniture gets dusted," and both of you smile, briefly lightening the invisible weight of ranking. Discipline enforces hierarchy with quiet efficiency. A worker scolded publicly shrinks for days afterward. Movements cautious, eyes lowered. Punishment ranges from docked wages to reassignment to the dirtiest tasks. Mainstream records show fines were common for lateness, talking, even smiling at the wrong moment. A fringe rumor claims one factory fined workers for sneezing too loudly, which sounds ridiculous until you remember how little mercy lives here. Historians still argue whether such discipline maintained order or merely bred resentment. You suspect it does both, like a fence that keeps animals in while making them restless. You witness a small drama unfold 2 rows away. A boy hesitates too long clearing a jam. The machine snarls, the belt slips, and production slows. A foreman appears almost instantly, voice cutting through the din, words sharp and economical. The boy flushes crimson, nodding furiously, hands shaking as he resumes. No injury this time, but the message is clear. Mistakes are expensive. Joke number 2 slips out later when your brother murmurs, "That foreman moves faster than the belts," and you agree, because some predators specialize in opportunity rather than speed. Humor, again, is survival. You notice how workers police themselves, correcting posture, warning of danger, urging speed. Peer pressure here is as strong as any rule. Mainstream historians note that factories relied heavily on informal supervision, workers enforcing standards among themselves. A quirky tidbit claims some groups developed secret signals to warn of inspections, like birds in a coal mine. Historians still argue whether these networks reduced accidents or merely delayed punishment. You participate without thinking, gesturing when a belt wobbles, murmuring when tension builds. Cooperation blurs with control. You are helping your brothers, but also protecting your own output, your own standing. Brotherhood, you are learning, does not erase hierarchy, it simply softens its edges. A skilled operator nearby commands quiet respect. He moves with economical grace, rarely corrected, occasionally consulted. You catch yourself watching, studying his timing, his confidence. Advancement here is apprenticeship by observation, ambition fed by proximity. Joke number 3 arrives when that same operator drops a tool and mutters, "Even legends fumble," which spreads a ripple of relief. If he can perhaps you can too. The afternoon deepens, heat thickens, sweat soaks collars and cuffs. The hierarchy becomes more visible as fatigue reveals habits, some slow, some rush, some grow brittle. Foremen intervene selectively, correcting those easiest to correct, ignoring those too valuable or too volatile. Fairness is aspirational. Historians still argue whether promotion was truly merit-based or largely arbitrary. Standing here, you suspect luck plays a larger role than anyone admits. Being noticed for the right reason, at the right moment, by the right person. This feels more decisive than skill alone. You feel the pressure of your new position, subtle but persistent. A mistake now would disappoint not only the foreman but your brothers, who see your progress as communal hope. You straighten unconsciously, movements careful, eyes alert. As the bell nears signaling break, you reflect on how quickly you have learned the invisible map of this place, who to avoid, who to emulate, where to stand, when to speak. This knowledge will never appear in ledgers, but it governs your days more thoroughly than any rule book. The hierarchy hums along with the machines, layered and intricate, binding hundreds of lives into a single vertical story. You occupy your rung carefully, aware that climbing is slow and falling is easy. When the bell finally rings, releasing you for a brief pause, you step back, stretch aching shoulders, and exchange looks with your brothers. Still intact, still employed, still moving upward or at least not downward. In this world, that counts as progress. The bell releases you into a moment so brief it almost feels imaginary. Mid-morning break, they call it, though. Break suggests rest, and rest is ambitious. You drift with your brothers toward a narrow strip of wall where fewer belts run overhead, and the noise softens from roar to relentless murmur. Shoulders sag in unison, spines crack quietly, hands flex as if remembering they are attached to living bodies. Hunger arrives immediately, punctual as the machines. Your stomach announces itself with a sound suspiciously like a small animal in distress. You reach into your pocket and retrieve the remains of breakfast, a heel of bread, dry and resilient, and a scrap of cheese that has warmed to the texture of philosophy. Mainstream historians note that factory meals were typically quick, cold, and carbohydrate-heavy, designed for energy rather than joy. A quirky tidbit claims one mill experimented with soup breaks, abandoning the idea after discovering spilled broth jammed 3 machines and 1 temper. You lean against the wall and chew slowly, because chewing fast does not make the bread disappear any more kindly. Around you, workers do the same, forming a quiet constellation of elbows and crumbs. Someone sighs theatrically, which is the closest thing to a protest this early in the day. Your brothers cluster nearby. The eldest offers you a bite of something slightly softer, an unspoken congratulations for mastering the new machine. You accept with gratitude because sharing here is not sentimental. It is strategic. Stronger siblings mean stronger households. Joke number 1 surfaces when the youngest peers at your cheese and says, "Cheerful, that's practically luxury," which is true enough to be funny. You reply, "I'll try not to get spoiled," and both of you smile, briefly rich in irony. The air in this corner feels marginally cleaner, though that may be optimism rather than reality. You notice how everyone uses the break differently. Some close their eyes, snatching seconds of rest. Some stretch limbs, coaxing circulation back into numb fingers. Others talk in low voices, exchanging rumors like contraband. One rumor today involves a new machine arriving next month, faster and rumored to be partially self-regulating. Mainstream accounts confirm that Victorian factories constantly updated equipment to chase efficiency. A fringe tidbit claims one inventor proposed a steam-powered lunch dispenser, rejected after testing because it launched sandwiches at alarming speed. Historians still argue whether technological progress improved working lives or simply accelerated exhaustion. You listen, half interested, half distracted by the slow return of hunger even as you eat. Time feels compressed here, each minute worth guarding. You glance toward the foremen, who remain on duty, watching, ensuring breaks do not grow ideas. Joke number 2 arrives when someone mutters, "If they shorten this break any more, we'll just inhale lunch," which earns a ripple of tired laughter. Inhaling lunch sounds efficient, but you suspect choking would harm productivity, which would make management reconsider. Your youngest brother rubs his wrists, wincing slightly. You notice, because you are trained now to notice everything. "New blister," he mouths. You nod sympathetically and mime peeling, which makes him grimace theatrically. Injury here is common, but complaining is optional. Historians still argue whether factory diets contributed significantly to long-term health problems or whether poverty alone deserves the blame. From your vantage, it feels like a collaboration. Bread fills bellies but not reserves. You imagine meals with vegetables, with meat that does not taste like effort, with time to sit. The fantasy is brief but pleasant. Across the room, a pair of workers debate quietly about Sunday sermons. Faith is another resource here, rationed carefully. Mainstream records show that many factories encouraged church attendance, believing morality improved punctuality. A quirky rumor claims one owner installed hymn boards in the washroom, which sounds both inspirational and deeply awkward. Joke number 3 surfaces when your brother whispers, "If they play hymns on the machines, I'm converting immediately." And you grin, picturing a loom belting out spiritual guidance between clacks. The bell looms in everyone's mind, an approaching thundercloud. You savor the last bites, brushing crumbs from your palms, already feeling the pull of motion again. Breaks here are not pauses, they are commas. You take a moment to look at your brothers, really look. Lines of fatigue already sketch their faces, though you are all young. You wonder briefly what you will look like in 10 years, 20, if lungs and joints cooperate. Historians still argue whether early industrial work shortened lives significantly or merely made them harder. You suspect both, again. The bell rings, sharp and final. Conversation dies mid-sentence, crumbs vanish, bodies straighten. You and your brothers exchange quick nods, the silent ritual of returning. As you walk back to your stations, you feel the hunger settle into a dull background ache. Familiar as the noise, the machines resume their claim on your hands, your time, your attention. Break is over, but the memory of stillness lingers for a few moments, like warmth after leaving sunlight. You take your place, grip the frame, and let the rhythm reclaim you. Mid-morning has passed. The long stretch toward afternoon begins. You return to motion with the faint taste of cheese still lingering, a luxury already fading into memory. The factory settles back into its relentless cadence, belts humming, wheels turning, dust floating like lazy constellations. Yet something subtle has shifted. Break has loosened tongues as much as muscles, and now rumors and whispers ripple through the aisles, carried on breath and bravado. You catch fragments as you work, Someone heard there was an accident in the North Wing last week. Someone else claims wages might rise a half penny by Christmas. A third insists a ghost walks the spinning room at night, rattling chains in protest. Mainstream historians confirm that gossip was a primary information network in factories, spreading news faster than official notices. A quirky tidbit suggests one mill once employed a rumor monitor to trace unrest, which sounds both efficient and exhausting. You lean closer to your brother, murmuring, "Anything new?" He shrugs, eyes on the fibers, and whispers about a lad dismissed for talking back. Discipline travels quickly, faster than machines. Joke number 1 surfaces when the youngest mutters, "If ghosts are striking, maybe they'll take our shift," which earns you a quick grin. The idea of spectral labor unions is oddly comforting. Whispers also carry warnings. A certain foreman is in a foul mood. A belt near the windows has been slipping all morning. A shipment is late, which means pressure will rise. This soft intelligence keeps you alert, steering your choices without formal orders. Historians still argue whether rumor strengthened worker solidarity or undermined it by breeding fear. From your perspective, it does both, like fire that warms and burns. You listen carefully, filtering exaggeration from usefulness. At lunch's edge, you overhear a tale about a hidden stash of tea behind the dye vats. Tea here is currency, medicine, and morale. Mainstream accounts note that tea breaks became common later, but early workers often brewed secretly. A fringe rumor claims one worker perfected a method to steep leaves using only steam leaks, which is either genius or desperation. Historians still argue whether caffeine improved productivity or simply masked fatigue. You file the information away because any advantage, however small, matters. Your machine continues its steady rhythm, but your mind dances lightly among these stories, half entertainment, half strategy. Joke number 2 arrives when your brother whispers, "If wages rise, I'm buying socks without holes." And you nod solemnly, because new socks truly are the height of ambition here. You notice how rumors follow hierarchy. Skilled workers hear different news than sweepers. Foremen trade their own stories, clipped and cautious. Management remains opaque, a distant cloud. Information, like pay, is unevenly distributed. Across the aisle, 2 women exchange rapid whispers, faces serious. You catch the word "strike" before the noise swallows the rest. The word sits heavy in your chest. Mainstream historians record early strikes as rare but growing by mid-century, risky acts that could end careers. A quirky tidbit claims one strike began because tea was served lukewarm, which is either trivial or deeply symbolic. Historians still argue what truly ignited collective action: hunger, pride, or sheer exhaustion. You do not ask questions. Curiosity here must be discreet. Instead, you focus on your hands, your timing, your brothers. But the idea lingers, a small spark in a room full of dust. Joke number 3 slips out when your youngest brother whispers, "If we strike, can we strike the machines?" And mimes punching a wheel. You grin, picturing the machines filing complaints. As the hours stretch, whispers fade into background noise, replaced by the steady chant of labor. Yet the knowledge remains, shaping how you see foremen, how you interpret glances, how you weigh risk. You realize the factory has 2 soundtracks, the audible roar of machinery and the quieter, more dangerous murmur of people. Historians still argue whether such informal communication networks empowered workers or merely kept them informed of their limits. Standing here, you suspect they do both. Knowing is not the same as changing, but it is the first step toward imagining change. A foreman passes, and conversations evaporate instantly like dew under sun. You nod respectfully, eyes down, hands busy. Authority patrols rumor as fiercely as output. As afternoon approaches, hunger returns, slower this time, more resigned. You think about lunch, about bread and tea, and whatever stories will accompany them. You also think about ghosts, strikes, socks, and steam-brewed tea. These fragments make the day less uniform, less machine-like. You glance at your brothers, exchanging brief looks that carry more than words. Family, again, is your safest network, your first source of news, your buffer against fear. Together, you navigate not only gears and belts, but information itself. The machines continue indifferent. The whispers settle, waiting for the next break, the next opening. And you, caught between noise and rumor, work on, a quiet listener in a loud world. By the time the endless afternoon truly announces itself, your body has surrendered any illusion of novelty. The machines no longer startle you. They simply exist, a permanent weather system of sound and motion. You slip back into repetition with the practiced ease of someone who knows there is no alternative. Hands guide, clear adjust. Eyes track fibers, belts, shadows. Breathing settles into a shallow rhythm that wastes as little effort as possible. This is the longest stretch of the day, the part without bells or breaks to divide it into polite pieces. Mainstream historians often call this the production core, which sounds impressive and completely ignores how slowly time crawls here. A quirky tidbit claims one worker once tried counting every wheel turn to pass the hours, stopping only after realizing he had aged 3 years in spirit. You feel the afternoon in your muscles first. A dull ache settles into shoulders and calves, the kind that does not hurt sharply enough to complain, but never quite leaves. Sweat dries and reappears in cycles, leaving salt lines on cuffs and collars. Dust clings to damp skin, turning you into a slowly moving sculpture. Joke number 1 surfaces when your brother mouths, "Is it still today?" And you reply, "Barely," which makes him roll his eyes. Time jokes are common here, because time is the main adversary. You let your mind drift, carefully, because too much drifting invites mistakes. Thoughts come in gentle loops. Hunger, the rumor of tea, the shape of the street outside. You remember the puddles, the boiling sky, the idea of rivers that run clear. These images feel almost scandalous in their quiet. Historians still argue whether factory monotony dulled minds or sharpened them through forced focus. From your vantage, it does both, blunting emotion while honing attention. You can now spot a misaligned fiber from across the frame, but you struggle to recall what you dreamed about last night. Across the room, a boy hums softly, almost inaudible, a tune you half recognize from church. The sound weaves through the machinery like a thin thread, briefly humanizing the noise. A foreman shoots him a warning look, and the humming fades. Music like laughter must be rationed. Joke number 2 arrives when the youngest pretends to hum loudly, then freezes dramatically when the foreman glances his way. You bite your lip to keep from laughing, because humor here is a dangerous sport. The light shifts imperceptibly as clouds thicken outside, turning the windows from grey to darker grey. You realize you have not seen the sun directly all day, only its diluted impression. Mainstream accounts note that many workers suffered vitamin deficiencies from lack of light. A fringe rumor claims one mill owner installed mirrors to double sunlight, which did not help but did create very confused pigeons. Historians still argue whether poor lighting affected productivity more than morale. You blink grit from your eyes and refocus. The machine answers with its steady purr, as if approving your renewed attention. You have begun to think of it as companion rather than enemy, which is either adaptation or Stockholm Syndrome, depending on how modern you feel. Joke number 3 slips out when your brother mouths, "If I stop moving, will I fossilize?" And you reply, "Only if they label you properly," earning a quick grin. Paleontology by exhaustion. As minutes ooze past, you notice small dramas unfolding. A worker drops a tool and retrieves it with lightning speed, eyes darting. Another pauses to stretch and is immediately replaced by a supervisor, a silent reminder that slowness is visible. Someone coughs deeply, repeatedly, a sound that echoes too long. Mainstream historians document respiratory illness as a common fate here, though official reports often soften the numbers. A quirky tidbit claims one doctor blamed excessive industriousness, which is impressively unhelpful. Historians still argue whether employers knowingly accepted these risks or genuinely misunderstood them. Standing here, breathing lint, you suspect ignorance and indifference made comfortable partners. Your hands continue their work, guided by muscle memory, now more than thought. You feel yourself becoming efficient, economical, a small improvement over the morning. Pride flickers, then fades, replaced by the deeper satisfaction of simply enduring. You check on your brothers with quick glances, all still standing. The youngest yawns behind his hand, eyes glassy. You catch his eye and tilt your head, a silent encouragement. He straightens, nodding, grateful. The afternoon thickens. Noise presses in. Your thoughts slow, becoming heavier, more deliberate. You begin to understand why some workers describe this hour as swimming through molasses. Historians still argue whether structured breaks would have improved output or merely revealed exhaustion sooner. You personally vote for breaks, but your vote does not exist. At last, faintly, almost unbelievably, you sense a change. The room's energy shifts, workers growing subtly restless. Somewhere, far off, a bell prepares itself. Hope here is not loud, it is a quiet tightening in the chest. Until it rings, you continue, guiding fibers, clearing jams, breathing dust, standing beside your brothers in the long, hypnotic middle of the day. The endless afternoon lives up to its name, but even endless things eventually end. When the bell finally releases you from the afternoon's grip, the relief arrives not as joy, but as a loosening, like untying a knot that has been quietly strangling you for hours. You drift with your brothers toward the wall again, limbs heavy, ears ringing, minds slow. Hunger sharpens instantly, eager to remind you that bread is overdue. This break feels different. Fatigue has thinned everyone's patience, and small irritations rise more easily to the surface. Brotherhood, you are discovering, does not cancel competition. It merely disguises it. You and your brothers gather with your tins and crusts, leaning shoulder to shoulder. The eldest produces a slightly larger piece of bread than the rest of you, and the youngest notices immediately. His eyebrows rise, dramatic as theatre curtains. "Where did that come from?" he mouths. The eldest shrugs, innocent as a saint, and takes a bite. You sense tension flicker, quick and sharp. Mainstream historians note that sibling labor often intensified rivalries, as brothers competed not only for wages but for favor, advancement, and scraps of advantage. A quirky tidbit claims one family kept a written ledger of who stole whose bread, which ended in a formal arbitration that no one remembers winning. Joke number one arrives when you whisper, "Careful, that bread looks ambitious," and the eldest snorts, nearly choking. The youngest rolls his eyes, but the tension softens just a little. Still, you feel it. The subtle measuring, the glances at hands at speed, at the foreman's attention earlier. You know your new machine assignment did not go unnoticed. Pride flickers in you, but so does guilt. Advancement here is never private. It ripples through households. Historians still argue whether sibling labor fostered cooperation or deepened rivalry. Standing here, you suspect it did both, sometimes within the same hour. The youngest complains about his blister, holding up a reddened palm with theatrical suffering. The eldest nods sympathetically, then casually mentions that skilled operators get easier tasks and slightly better pay. The timing is not accidental. Joke number two slips out when you reply, "Yes, but they also get eaten first when machines revolt," which earns you a weak laugh and deflects the edge. You know what he means, though. Your progress is visible. Visibility breeds expectation. Across the wall, two brothers argue quietly about whose turn it is to fetch water. Their voices rise just enough to earn a foreman's glance. Instantly both fall silent, rivalry postponed by authority. Mainstream records show that foremen often exploited sibling dynamics, pitting brothers against each other to increase output. A fringe rumor claims one supervisor arranged friendly competitions with small prizes, which improved productivity but ended several holidays. You watch your own brothers carefully now, noticing things you once ignored. The eldest's jaw tightens when the foreman praises you later in passing. The youngest watches your hands when you return to work, studying your rhythm, your confidence. You realize you are no longer just family, you are benchmarks. Joke number 3 surfaces when the youngest whispers, "If you get promoted again, do I have to call you sir?" And you reply, "Only on Sundays," which earns a grin. Humor again keeps envy from growing teeth. Back at your stations, the rivalry continues silently. You push yourself slightly harder unconsciously, clearing jams faster, adjusting tension more smoothly. You catch yourself checking your brother's pace, comparing, calculating. Brotherhood does not stop ambition, it simply gives it familiar faces. Historians still argue whether such competition improved skill or eroded solidarity. From your vantage, it sharpens both. You learn faster, but you also guard your progress more carefully. A small incident unfolds mid-aisle. Your eldest brother misjudges a fiber feed, causing a brief snag. You notice instantly, step forward without thinking, and correct it with a quick motion. Crisis averted. The foreman nods approvingly at you. The eldest does not look at you. Guilt blooms, slow and heavy. You had helped him, yes, but you had also been seen. You mouth, "Sorry," but he pretends not to notice. The machines roar on, indifferent to family politics. Mainstream accounts often celebrate families working together as models of unity. A quirky tidbit claims one factory banned brothers from the same row after too many arguments ended in flying spindles. Historians still argue whether separation reduced conflict or simply relocated it. As the afternoon wears on, you feel the rivalry settle into a quieter shape, less sharp, more resigned. This is not hatred, it is survival mathematics. Each of you wants slightly better tasks, slightly better pay, slightly better odds of lasting. You remind yourself that your brother's success is your success. Wages pool. Bread is shared. Illness affects everyone. Yet the individual hunger for progress persists, stubborn as dust. Near the end of the shift, your youngest brother manages a small triumph, clearing a stubborn jam without assistance. He glances at you, eyes bright with pride. You give him an exaggerated nod, thumbs up, silently cheering. Rivalry softens again, turning briefly into encouragement. Historians still argue whether sibling workers fared better emotionally than solitary ones. Watching your brothers? You think they did, though better is relative. At least your competition knows your childhood, your fears, your jokes. As the final bell approaches, fatigue flattens ambition. You all slow together, shoulders sagging, hands heavy. Rivalry fades in the face of shared exhaustion. In this hour you are simply brothers again, bound by dust and noise and the promise of leaving. When the bell finally rings, releasing you, you step back with the same collective sigh, exchanging looks that say, "Still here, still together, still managing." Rivalries will wait for tomorrow. Tonight, survival is victory enough. As the shift drags into its final hours, the air itself seems to thicken, as if the factory is slowly filling with something invisible and heavy. You notice it first in your throat, a dry scratch that no amount of swallowing relieves. Then in your chest, a faint tightness that sits behind every breath like an uninvited guest. This is the dust hour, though no one officially names it. Cotton lint swirls more densely now, stirred by constant motion and rising heat. In certain shafts of light, you can see it dancing, delicate and harmless, looking like snow in slow motion. Mainstream historians note that cotton dust exposure led to widespread lung problems among textile workers, often called mill fever or brown lung in later years. A quirky tidbit claims one doctor once prescribed singing loudly as treatment, believing strong lungs could shout disease away. Historians still argue whether this helped morale more than health. You inhale carefully, shallow breaths, a habit learned young. Deep breathing here is ambitious. You wipe your mouth with your sleeve and taste grit. Your brothers cough occasionally, short, sharp sounds they try to disguise as clearing throats. Joke number 1 arrives when the youngest whispers, "I think I'm inhaling tomorrow's shirt," and you reply, "At least you'll be well dressed inside," which earns a tired grin. Humor, again, turns discomfort into something manageable. You become more aware of the room's atmosphere than its noise. The dust coats everything now. Machines, hair, eyelashes, skin, softening edges, muting colors. By the end of the day, everyone looks faintly powdered, like ghosts rehearsing. Mainstream accounts describe workers emerging pale and unrecognizable. Families barely able to tell who was who until faces were washed. Historians still argue whether factory owners understood the long-term effects of this air. Some records show concern, limited ventilation experiments, even the occasional window opened. A fringe rumor claims one mill installed fans powered by treadmills, abandoned after workers refused to walk in circles during breaks. You suspect practicality defeated compassion again. Your chest tightens slightly as you reach for a stubborn fiber. You pause, cough once, then continue. Coughing here is background noise, so common it barely registers. Only when someone coughs blood does it earn attention, and even then, not much. Joke number 2 surfaces when your brother mimes scooping dust into a cup and offering it as tea. You shake your head solemnly, pretending to sip, and both of you smile weakly. Luxury beverages. You notice an older worker nearby, shoulders hunched, breathing shallow, a permanent wheeze underscoring his movements. He has worked here decades, they say, lungs slowly trading elasticity for lint. Mainstream historians record many such cases, though official death certificates often blamed consumption or weak constitution. Historians still argue whether this language concealed industrial responsibility or simply reflected limited medical knowledge. Your machine hums on indifferent. You guide fibers, clear jams, blink grit from your eyes. The dust stings slightly now, a reminder that your body is not designed for this atmosphere, no matter how well it adapts. Joke number 3 arrives when the youngest whispers, "If we blow our noses, will cloth come out?" And you reply, "Only if we're being productive," which earns a soft laugh. Productivity, here, infiltrates even anatomy. The foreman passes, handkerchief pressed discreetly to his mouth. Authority coughs too, it seems. For a brief, rebellious moment, you feel comforted by that. As the final stretch continues, you grow acutely aware of every breath. You imagine air as something you earn, measured in shifts and years. You wonder briefly what lungs look like inside, whether yours already carry the faint grey tint of industry. Historians still argue whether workers sensed the danger early or only recognized it when damage was done. Standing here, you think you sense it now, vaguely, like distant thunder. But sensing is not the same as escaping. Your brothers cough more frequently now, especially the youngest, whose chest rises too quickly. You give him a concerned look. He shrugs mouths. "I'm fine," the universal lie. Family teaches you not to alarm easily, because alarm accomplishes little. The bell's approach becomes a shared prayer. Everyone's movements grow slightly more urgent, as if speed might thin the air. The dust continues its lazy snowfall, uncaring. When the bell finally rings, sharp and merciful, you almost sigh aloud. Machines slow, belts slacken, noise ebbs into echoes. Workers straighten slowly, stretching, coughing, rubbing eyes. The dust settles reluctantly, coating the floor like pale frost. You step away from your station and inhale deeply for the first time in hours, even though the air outside the immediate aisle is not much better. Your lungs protest, then comply. You glance at your brothers, counting coughs, counting breaths, counting years you hope you all still have. As you file toward the exit, dust clinging to your hair and clothes, you understand that the factory does not only take your time and strength, it borrows pieces of you quietly, breath by breath. And tomorrow you will lend them again, when the machines slow and the floor exhales its last shudder of motion. You think the hardest part of the day is over. You are wrong in a quieter, more instructive way. The noise fades, but the rules remain, and discipline, here, does not clock out. You and your brothers line up loosely near your stations, waiting for dismissal that arrives not as kindness, but as procedure. Foreman patrol one last time, eyes sharp, noting unfinished tasks, stray fibers, uncollected tools. Mainstream historians record that end-of-day inspections were common, designed to protect property more than people. A quirky tidbit claims one mill once weighed workers on exit to check for stolen cotton. Abandoning the practice after discovering dust alone explained most gains. You stand still, hands clasped, posture attentive. Fatigue makes your shoulders slump, but you straighten them deliberately. Slouching can be interpreted as defiance, and defiance has consequences. The foreman stops near a boy 2 rows over, gestures sharply at a tangle of fibers left unattended. His voice is not loud, but it does not need to be. Everyone within earshot stiffens. The boy flushes, stammers an apology, moves quickly to fix the problem. Punishment this time is only delay, but delay means later dismissal, and later dismissal means darker streets. Historians still argue whether such discipline improved standards or merely taught fear. Standing here, you suspect fear is cheaper than training. Joke number 1 sneaks out when your brother whispers, if he finds one more fiber, we'll be here until breakfast. And you reply, at least we'll save on rent, which earns a tired grin. Humor again oils the gears of patience. You notice how carefully everyone performs obedience now, the day's rebellion stored away for safer hours. Caps are straightened. Sleeves are brushed. Tools are aligned with near reverence. This ritual matters. Mistakes now are remembered longer than mistakes at noon. Mainstream accounts note that discipline extended beyond productivity to morality. Workers could be fined for swearing, fighting, even laughing at the wrong moment. A fringe rumor claims one factory dismissed a man for whistling after dark, which sounds absurd until you recall how control here prefers absolutes. Historians still argue whether such rules aim to shape character or simply reduce noise. Your youngest brother fidgets, shifting weight from foot to foot. You give him a look, subtle but firm. Stillness now. He freezes, eyes wide, then relaxes slightly when the foreman passes without comment. Joke number 2 surfaces when the eldest murmurs, he walks like a church sermon, and you nod solemnly, because sermons are long, moral, and hard to escape. At last, dismissal comes. Not a bell, but a curt nod, a gesture that releases dozens of bodies at once. Relief ripples through the room, visible in sighs, stretches, the sudden loosening of faces. Yet even now, discipline lingers. No one rushes. Running suggests eagerness, and eagerness suggests something to hide. You collect your tools, check your pockets, brush lint from your sleeves with hands already resigned to futility. The dust will follow you home, into bed, into dreams. Mainstream historians note that workers often carried factory grime back to their families, spreading illness unknowingly. A quirky tidbit claims one woman trained her cat to lick lint from her husband's hair, which sounds both practical and deeply strange. As you queue toward the door, you witness a small punishment enacted. A man who arrived late this morning is held back, assigned to sweep the floor before leaving. His shoulders sag, resignation carved into posture. Historians still argue whether such punishments deterred lateness or simply redistributed misery. You suspect misery multiplies well on its own. Joke number 3 slips out when your youngest brother whispers, if sweeping burns calories, he'll be promoted by Friday. And you grin, because promotion by broom is a comforting fantasy. You pass the foreman on your way out. He nods once at you, brief, approving. The gesture warms you more than it should. Recognition here is rare, and therefore potent. You wonder if your brothers noticed. You hope they did not. Outside the factory doors, sound collapses suddenly, leaving your ears ringing in the abrupt quiet. The street greets you with its familiar chaos. Vendors calling, carts rattling, children shouting. Yet compared to the factory, it feels almost gentle. You inhale deeply, air still smoky but freer, and feel your lungs expand in gratitude. Around you, workers stretch, cough, rub eyes, laugh softly. Discipline loosens its grip, though not entirely. Habits linger. Posture remains guarded. Voices stay low. Historians still argue whether such strict discipline created better workers or merely obedient ones. Walking now beside your brothers, you think it created survivors, which is not quite the same thing. You glance back once at the factory, its windows glowing faintly, machines resting briefly before tomorrow's hunger. You feel a complicated mix of relief, pride, resentment, and weary acceptance. The day's labor is done, but its lessons remain. Stand straight, speak softly, move carefully, obey, but notice, these rules will follow you long after the dust leaves your hair. With a quiet sigh, you turn away and head into evening, discipline fading step by step, replaced slowly by the fragile freedom of being done. The street receives you like an old acquaintance who knows all your bad habits and forgives most of them. Evening has softened the light, stretching shadows across cobbles, tinting the smoke a warmer shade of grey. Your ears still ring faintly, carrying echoes of belts and wheels, and for a moment every clatter of cart or shout of vendor feels like an afterimage of the factory. You walk with your brothers, steps slow, shoulders loose now that discipline has loosened its grip. This hour belongs more to people than to machines. Though industry still hums in the background, a distant thunder you can never quite escape. As you move through the streets, you notice small acts unfolding, subtle and deliberate. A worker pauses to wipe grease from a sign, smearing a political slogan into harmless shapes. Another slips a tool into a hidden pocket, eyes darting. Mainstream historians record that petty resistance was common, stealing time, tools, scraps of material, small rebellions that rarely made it into official accounts. A quirky tidbit claims one man once sabotaged a loom by tying its belt with a shoelace, blaming footwear for the delay. Historians still argue whether such acts mattered or merely soothed pride. You and your brothers practice your own quiet resistance. You walk slower than necessary, reclaiming minutes stolen by whistles. You take a longer route home, just to feel movement unmeasured. You pause at a corner to watch a street performer juggle apples badly, applauding with more enthusiasm than skill deserves. Joke number one arrives when the youngest whispers, "If we walk any slower, they'll pay us overtime." And you reply, "Don't tempt fate," which earns a grin. Resistance by pacing. You pass a public house spilling laughter and warmth onto the pavement. Men lean in doorways, mugs in hand, voices loud, worries temporarily drowned. Mainstream accounts note that taverns were hubs of worker organization as well as escape. A fringe rumor claims one pub hid strike plans inside beer barrels, which sounds ingenious until you imagine soggy paperwork. Historians still argue whether alcohol dulled dissent or fueled it. You keep walking. Coins are few, and tomorrow arrives early. Instead, you savor the simple pleasure of not working, of letting your hands swing freely, of breathing air not deliberately filled with dust. Across the street, a group of boys play marbles crouched low, arguing fiercely over rules that seem invented mid-sentence. You smile faintly, remembering when games were your main occupation. Historians still argue whether industrial labor erased childhood or merely redefined it. Watching these boys, you think it did both unevenly. Joke number two surfaces when your brother points at the marbles and says, "Careful, they'll recruit us." And you reply, "Only if they offer breaks," which earns a soft laugh. You notice how workers signal to each other in passing, nods, raised eyebrows, brief touches on sleeves. These gestures carry meaning: solidarity, warning, congratulations. Mainstream records rarely mention them, but they stitch the workforce together quietly. A quirky tidbit claims some mills developed entire sign languages for inspections, which sounds plausible when words are dangerous. Historians still argue whether such networks constituted early unions or merely friendships. From your vantage, labels matter less than outcomes. They make days survivable. Near a lamppost, you overhear a whispered exchange about wages being shorted. Another voice suggests complaining, a third warns against it. Resistance hovers here, always potential, rarely safe. You store the information away, uncertain what to do with it. Joke number 3 arrives when your youngest brother whispers, "If we rebel, can we start after supper?" And you nod solemnly, because revolutions on empty stomachs are poorly planned. As you near your neighborhood, the streets narrow again, buildings leaning closer, laundry lines sagging overhead. Home announces itself with familiar smells: cabbage, soap, damp wool. Fatigue settles more heavily now that movement is no longer compulsory. You think about the small resistances of the day: slow steps, stolen smiles, whispered jokes, careful glances. They do not change the system, but they change you slightly, preserving pieces the machines cannot reach. Historians still argue whether everyday resistance laid foundations for later reforms or simply eased consciences. Walking here beside your brothers, you think it did something quieter, and perhaps more important, it reminded you that you are not only a worker. You reach your building, pausing at the threshold. The factory's glow is distant now, muted by walls and distance. You exhale, feeling tension drain from shoulders and spine. Inside, stairs creak familiarly, greeting you with their own tired voices. You climb with your brothers, steps synchronized again, rivalry and hierarchy forgotten for the moment. Resistance, for tonight, is complete. You have left the machines behind. You have claimed a few unmeasured minutes. Tomorrow you will surrender them again. But for now, in this narrow stairwell, with evening settling gently over brick and smoke, you are briefly, wonderfully your own. Evening errands wait for no one, not even the gloriously exhausted. Before home can truly claim you, your mother's quiet instructions echo in your head: pick up coal, deliver a message, return the borrowed kettle. Work, you are learning, does not end when machines stop. It simply changes costumes. You and your brothers fan out at the corner, each assigned a small task that somehow feels as important as the day's labor. You take the narrow lane toward the chandler's shop, pocketing a few precious coins and hoping they will be enough. The street glows amber now under gaslight, shadows long and theatrical, making every doorway seem to harbor a story. Mainstream historians note that working-class families relied heavily on children for errands and informal labor, turning evenings into logistical exercises. A quirky tidbit claims one London boy once completed 17 errands in a single hour, earning the nickname Postal Express, which is either admirable or deeply concerning. Historians still argue whether such routines built responsibility or simply extended exploitation. You step carefully around a puddle reflecting a flickering lamp and nearly collide with a woman balancing 2 baskets and 3 opinions. You apologize automatically, and she waves you off, already scolding someone else. Courtesy here is reflex on to avoid conflict in crowded spaces. At the chandler's, the shopkeeper squints at you over spectacles older than the counter. You request coal measured carefully, because too much costs more than you have and too little means cold mornings. Mainstream accounts record that fuel purchases were a constant anxiety for poor families, especially in winter. A fringe rumor claims one man tried heating his room with stolen theater programs, which ended in smoke, disappointment, and a very annoyed landlord. Joke number 1 arrives when the shopkeeper mutters, "Coal's gone up again," and you reply, "Hasn't everything?" which earns you a rare smile. Inflation, it seems, is timeless. You tuck the small sack under your arm and head toward the next task, delivering a note to an aunt 3 streets away. The letter is folded carefully, precious as any coin, containing news about work, wages, and the ongoing saga of a leaking roof. You feel oddly important carrying it, a messenger in a city that runs on small communications. As you walk, you notice how different the streets feel now. The day's frenzy has softened into pockets of activity: children chasing hoops, women gossiping at thresholds, men arguing politics with impressive volume. Mainstream historians describe evenings as the social heart of working-class neighborhoods. A quirky tidbit claims one alley hosted nightly debates about whether pigeons understood English, which sounds exactly like something tired people would argue. Historians still argue whether such gatherings fostered political awareness or simply provided distraction. From your vantage, they do both, depending on the evening and the beer. You deliver the note, exchange brief pleasantries, and accept a small apple in return, bruised but welcome. You pocket it gratefully, already imagining the crunch. Errands here often pay in produce rather than coins, a currency you appreciate. Joke number 2 surfaces when a neighbor sees your coal sack and says, "Careful, that's heavier than your future." And you reply, "At least this I can carry," which earns a laugh. Existential humor, now available on every corner. On your way back, you run into your youngest brother struggling with a bundle of laundry nearly his size. You wordlessly take one end, easing the load, and walk together, steps matched. Family logistics, like factory rhythms, depend on coordination. You pass the public pump, where women queue patiently, buckets lined like soldiers. Mainstream accounts note that clean water access remained uneven well into the Victorian era. A fringe rumor claims one pump cured all illness until someone tested it, which ended that theory quickly. Historians still argue how much public health reforms owed to activism versus outbreaks. Joke number 3 arrives when your brother peers into the pump and says, "If we fall in, do we come out cleaner or wiser?" And you reply, "Probably neither," which earns a grin. At last, errands complete, you return to your building, arms aching pleasantly with a different kind of effort. The stairwell smells of soup and soap, and tired people, a comforting blend. You climb slowly now, savoring the approach of rest. These small tasks, you realize, are threads holding your family together. Coal becomes warmth, letters become connection, apples become dessert. Mainstream histories often focus on factories and reforms, but these errands, these quiet circuits of care, are what keep households breathing. Historians still argue whether such domestic labor should be counted as work. Carrying coal, delivering news, fetching water. You think it should, because your muscles certainly do. You reach your door and pause, listening to muffled voices inside, the familiar music of family. You knock softly, shift the coal sack, and step in when it opens, greeted by warmth that has nothing to do with fuel. Tonight, you have not only survived the factory, you have stitched together the evening, one errand at a time. Home greets you with a low ceiling, a narrow corridor, and the layered scent of boiled vegetables, damp wool, and something faintly medicinal. The door closes behind you with a familiar click that feels more final than any factory bell. Here, at least, the machines cannot follow. Your brothers trickle in one by one, depositing coal sacks, apples, kettles, stories. The room fills with motion as your mother orchestrates the evening like a conductor with too few instruments. A pot simmers on the stove, sending up modest clouds of steam that feel luxurious after cotton dust. Mainstream historians note that evening meals were often the emotional anchor of working-class families, brief islands of routine in uncertain days. A quirky tidbit claims one household measured prosperity by how often onions appeared in supper, which sounds about right. You wash your hands in a chipped basin, watching grey water swirl away, taking a day's worth of grime with it. No matter how much you scrub, a faint shadow remains beneath your nails, proof that the factory has opinions about leaving you alone. Joke number 1 surfaces when your youngest brother examines his hands and says, "I think my fingerprints are permanently industrial." And you reply, "Very fashionable this season," which earns a laugh from across the room. Industrial chick. Supper is simple bread, potatoes, a thin broth stretched with hope. You sit shoulder to shoulder around the small table, knees knocking, elbows negotiating territory. Conversation rises cautiously, testing the safety of the space. Complaints about foremen, gossip from the street, speculation about wages. Mainstream accounts note that families often pooled information at meals, turning supper into an informal briefing. A fringe rumor claims one family coded complaints into recipes, which sounds deliciously paranoid. Historians still argue whether such discussions fostered class consciousness or simply vented frustration. From your vantage, they do both, but mostly they remind you that you are not alone. Your eldest brother describes the near miss with the jam, omitting your involvement with careful diplomacy. You appreciate the restraint. The youngest dramatizes his blister, milking sympathy until your mother produces a rag and vinegar with theatrical resignation. Joke number 2 arrives when your father, home from his own labor, peers into the thin broth and says, "Ah, soup you can read through," which earns a chorus of groans and smiles. Culinary transparency. After eating, you clear bowls, stack crusts, pour the last of the broth into cups for those still hungry. Mainstream historians note that nothing was wasted here. Every scrap repurposed, every bone boiled again. A quirky tidbit claims one woman kept a loaf alive for 6 months by continually refreshing it, which sounds like bread-based immortality. Historians still argue whether thrift was virtue or necessity. You suspect it was both. Errands continue even now. Your mother hands you a small bundle of tools to return to a neighbor, and you head back out briefly, enjoying the cool night air. The street has quieted, voices lower, lamps glowing steadily. You deliver the tools, exchange a few words, accept thanks, and return, feeling oddly accomplished. Joke number 3 surfaces when your neighbor says, "Careful with those, they're sharper than my temper." And you reply, "I'll keep them away from politics," earning a chuckle. Tools and opinions alike. Back inside, the family settles into evening rhythms. Someone mends a sock. Someone reads aloud from a newspaper borrowed and nearly illegible. Children drowse against walls. You stretch carefully, easing muscles stiff from standing all day. Fatigue now feels honest, earned, not enforced. Historians still argue whether such domestic routines softened the harshness of industrial life or merely prepared workers for the next day. Sitting here, you think they did both. They heal just enough to send you back. You notice how your brothers relax now, rivalry gone, shoulders loose, voices warmer. The factory hierarchy dissolves here, replaced by birth order, jokes, shared memories. Family again becomes refuge. Outside, a distant whistle sounds, announcing another shift for someone else. You shiver slightly, grateful it is not for you tonight. The hours ahead belong to rest, however brief. Your mother dims the lamp, saving oil, and the room slides gently into shadow. You gather bedding, claim your familiar corner, and settle in with a sigh that feels like punctuation at the end of a very long sentence. Tonight, you have carried messages, coal, tools, and stories. You have stitched the day into something that makes sense, at least inside these walls. Tomorrow will come, loud and early. But for now, with supper finished and errands done, you are simply home. The room grows quieter as evening deepens, not suddenly, but by gentle subtraction. One voice drifts away, another softens. A chair creaks and then settles for the night. Candlelight flickers against walls that lean inward as if listening. This is home in narrow quarters, where privacy is an abstract concept and comfort is negotiated carefully. You spread your bedding on the familiar patch of floor, straw mattress flattened by years of loyal service. One brother claims the corner near the wall, another the space by the door. Each position chosen for reasons no one fully remembers but no one dares challenge. Mainstream historians note that overcrowding was a defining feature of working-class housing, with entire families often sharing a single room. A quirky tidbit claims one London family installed a curtain between beds and called it the corridor, which sounds both hopeful and optimistic. Historians still argue whether such proximity strengthened family bonds or simply eroded patience. You remove your boots, setting them carefully near the door, and flex aching toes. The floor is cool, a welcome contrast after a day of heat. You stretch slowly, mindful of elbows and knees in shared territory. Here, every movement has consequences, and negotiation replaces solitude. Joke number 1 surfaces when your youngest brother declares, "If I roll over, I'm invading 3 countries," and you reply, "Mind the borders." which earns a soft laugh. International relations, bedroom edition. Around you, evening rituals unfold. Someone patches a tear by lamplight, needle flashing rhythmically. Someone else counts coins quietly, lips moving in silent arithmetic. Your father coughs into a cloth, then pretends not to, which convinces no one. Mainstream accounts note that illness often spread quickly in such close quarters, a ventilation more rumor than fact. A fringe rumor claims one landlord installed vents that actually funneled smoke from downstairs kitchens, improving flavor but worsening health. Historians still argue whether housing reform lagged due to ignorance or indifference. You lie back, staring at the low ceiling, tracing cracks that form imaginary maps. You have named some of them. There's the river, the mountain, the island you will never visit. This is your geography, measured in inches. Your brothers whisper nearby, sharing fragments of the day, plans for tomorrow, speculations about machines and foremen and rumors. Their voices blend into a comforting murmur, the soundtrack of endurance. You add a comment now, and then, mostly listening, enjoying the rare luxury of stillness. Joke number 2 arrives when someone complains about a draft and another replies, "That's not a draft, that's ambition escaping," which earns a round of quiet chuckles. Dreams, apparently, are not well insulated. You notice how fatigue rearranges your thoughts. Worries blur at the edges, sharpness softening into something manageable. The factory recedes, noise fading into memory. Your body sinks gradually into the mattress, straw crackling softly, accepting your weight like an old friend. Historians still argue whether such living conditions were psychologically damaging or simply normal for the era. From your vantage, they are both. You crave space, yet cannot imagine sleeping alone. Silence would feel suspicious. The youngest brother fidgets, searching for a comfortable position, elbow poking you gently. You shift obligingly, making room, because family space is elastic when necessary. He murmurs thanks, already half asleep. Joke number 3 surfaces when your eldest whispers, "If we stack ourselves right, we'll save floor space." And you reply, "Careful, we'll be rented as furniture," which earns a last ripple of laughter before quiet settles again. Outside, the city murmurs on. Distant carts, late voices, the occasional bark. Inside, breath synchronizes gradually, rising and falling in uneven harmony. You listen to it, grounding yourself in the simple fact that everyone you care about is still breathing. Mainstream historians note that such homes often lacked proper sanitation, contributing to disease. A quirky tidbit claims one reformer proposed hammocks to reduce floor crowding, rejected after the first family tangled themselves irretrievably. Historians still argue whether innovation failed here due to design or stubborn tradition. Your eyelids grow heavy. Thoughts drift lazily, the machine's rhythm, the smell of coal, the feel of bread in your hand, the sight of dusk on cobbles. You replay the day in fragments, editing out the worst, keeping the bearable. This room, cramped and imperfect, is your harbor. It shelters you from whistles and belts, from foremen and dust. It does not give you solitude, but it gives you something better tonight, belonging. As the candle is finally pinched out, darkness slides gently over everything. You adjust your blanket, tuck hands against chest, and let the quiet claim you. Tomorrow will demand you again. But for now, in these narrow quarters, surrounded by warm breathing and familiar shadows, you are safely, undeniably home. Sleep does not arrive immediately. It circles you politely, waiting for the room to settle into full quiet, for breaths to deepen, for thoughts to loosen their grip. In the dim, with only the faint glow of streetlight leaking through cracks, the room becomes a soft cave of whispers and sighs. Someone clears their throat. Someone turns, straw rustling. The house speaks in tiny noises, old wood shifting, pipes clicking, the distant rattle of a cart passing like a dream drifting by. This is the hour for stories, when fatigue lowers defenses and memory becomes generous. Your eldest brother murmurs something about the day, voice low and unguarded now that no foreman can hear. He tells a small tale about a near accident years ago, a belt snapping, a man jumping just in time. Mainstream historians note that storytelling was a common way workers processed danger, turning fear into narrative. A quirky tidbit claims one factory kept a storybook of accidents to scare apprentices into caution, which sounds effective but profoundly unsettling. Historians still argue whether such tales reduced accidents or merely spread anxiety. You listen, half awake, tracing the edges of his words. Stories here are not entertainment, they are instruction, warning, reassurance. They tell you where danger lies and how others survived it. Your youngest brother chimes in, asking questions, eyes wide even in darkness. Did it hurt? Did he keep working? Did he get paid? The answers come gently, carefully edited. Truth here is filtered, not to deceive, but to protect sleep. Joke number 1 surfaces when someone whispers, "If we keep telling these, I'm dreaming of belts chasing me." And you reply, "At least they'll be punctual," earning a few muffled laughs. Nightmare scheduling. Conversation drifts to rumors from the floor, whispers of strikes, new machines, foreman's moods. Speculation floats easily in the dark, safer without witnesses. Mainstream accounts note that evenings were prime time for political discussion among workers, free from immediate supervision. A fringe rumor claims one family debated labor reform so passionately they woke the landlord who joined in. Historians still argue whether such talks fueled real change or simply vented steam. You add a thought about the new machine, about how it felt, how fast it moved. Your brothers listen closely, filing away details, measuring their own chances. In this room, information is currency. Joke number 2 arrives when your youngest whispers, "If machines keep getting faster, they'll finish before we start." And you reply, "Then maybe we can sleep in," which earns a sigh laugh. Automation, the optimistic version. The talk softens gradually, sliding from factories to family memories. Games played in alleys, summers that felt longer, a time when waking did not immediately mean working. Mainstream historians often lament the loss of leisure in industrial life. A quirky tidbit claims one Victorian pamphlet suggested workers recall happy childhoods to improve morale, which sounds nice and accomplishes nothing. Historians still argue whether nostalgia helped endurance or merely sharpened loss. You remember a river outside the city, visited once on a rare holiday, water clear enough to see stones. The memory feels unreal now, like something borrowed from someone else's life. You share it quietly, and your brothers listen, briefly transported. Joke number 3 slips out when someone says, "If rivers still run clear, they're hiding from London." And you nod solemnly, because that feels accurate. Silence returns slowly, respectful, like a blanket being pulled up. One by one, voices fade, breaths deepen, bodies surrender to sleep. You lie still, savoring the calm, aware that these moments stitch resilience into you. Historians still argue whether family storytelling strengthened mental health or simply preserved tradition. Lying here, you think it does both, giving shape to fear and warmth to memory. Your thoughts wander lazily now. You imagine futures, small ones, realistic ones. Maybe a slightly better machine. Maybe steadier wages. Maybe lungs that last. Dreams here are modest, but they are yours. Outside, a church bell tolls the hour, distant and gentle. Time continues its slow patrol, indifferent but reliable. Inside, you float between waking and sleep, held by murmurs, by warmth, by the knowledge that tomorrow you will not face the machines alone. As consciousness softens, the day loosens its grip. The factory fades, replaced by images of rivers, apples, flickering lamps. Your last thought before sleep claims you is simple and surprisingly comforting. Today you endured. Today you belonged. Sleep releases you reluctantly, like a tide pulling back inch by inch, and for a moment you are not sure where you are. The ceiling swims into focus, cracks rearranging themselves into familiar maps, and the quiet breath of your brothers reminds you that you are home, not yet summoned by whistles or bells. But this is the strange hour, the in-between, when evening still has one decision left to make. Night school waits a few streets away, its lamplight glowing faintly in your memory, promising letters, numbers, and a future that does not entirely smell of oil. Exhaustion, on the other hand, waits right here, heavy and persuasive, offering nothing but sleep and the soft mercy of unconsciousness. Mainstream historians note that adult and adolescent education programs expanded during the Victorian era, often held at night for workers who labored all day. A quirky tidbit claims one school offered free cocoa to encourage attendance, which immediately doubled enrollment and improved spelling. Historians still argue whether such education truly enabled social mobility or merely polished endurance. You lie still, weighing your options. Your body votes firmly for sleep. Muscles ache, eyes burn, lungs still feel dusty. The mattress cradles you with seductive patience. Yet somewhere inside, a quieter voice reminds you that letters are lighter than machines, that knowledge does not cut fingers, that learning might one day change where you stand. Your eldest brother stirs, propping himself on one elbow. "You're going," he whispers, voice already half asleep. His tone holds no judgment, only curiosity. "Maybe," you murmur, which is the most honest answer you can manage. Joke number one surfaces when the youngest, barely awake, mutters, "If you learn to read faster, can you read the machine's minds?" And you reply, "Only their complaints," earning a sleepy grin. Literacy for mechanical therapy. You sit up slowly, testing the stiffness in your back, the heaviness in your head. The room feels warmer now, cozier, as if deliberately discouraging departure. Outside, the street hums softly, night settling into its own rhythm. Historians still argue whether night education improved workers' prospects significantly or simply exhausted them further. From your vantage, both outcomes seem equally plausible. You rise quietly, careful not to wake anyone fully, and pull on your jacket. The movement alone feels like a small victory. You splash water on your face, wincing at the cold, and rub your eyes until the world sharpens reluctantly. Your mother notices, nods approvingly, hands busy with mending. "Don't be late," she whispers, meaning both for class and for life. The double meaning lands gently. Outside, the street is calmer now, gas lamps painting puddles gold, voices fewer, shadows longer. You walk toward the schoolhouse, steps slow but determined, passing familiar doorways where laughter spills, where music drifts, where rest seduces. Joke number two arrives when you yawn so widely you nearly swallow a lamppost and mutter, "F knowledge is power, I'm running on fumes," which makes you smile at yourself. Philosophical exhaustion. The schoolroom is modest, a single chamber with benches, a blackboard, and a teacher who looks only slightly less tired than you feel. Around you other workers gather, men, women, a few boys your age, all carrying the same mixture of hope and fatigue. Mainstream accounts note that attendance fluctuated wildly, weather and wages often more persuasive than ambition. A fringe rumor claims one class once outnumbered its factory in attendance during a particularly inspiring arithmetic lesson, which sounds mythical but pleasant. You take a seat, back straight, hands folded, eyes already struggling to focus. The lesson begins with letters tonight, chalk scratching gently, forming shapes that promise meaning. You trace them in your mind carefully, as if they might slip away. Historians still argue whether literacy was the key driver of reform or merely a companion to it. Sitting here, you suspect it is both, a tool that needs courage to wield. Minutes pass, your eyelids droop, the room grows warm, the teacher's voice soothing, almost hypnotic. You fight sleep bravely, pinching your arm, shifting position, willing your mind to stay open. Knowledge, unfortunately, does not shout. Joke number three surfaces when a man beside you nods off and nearly topples, and you whisper, "Careful, you're dreaming in public," earning a suppressed chuckle. Educational hazards. You manage to copy a few lines, clumsy but legible. Each letter feels like a small triumph, proof that you are more than your hands, more than your output. The numbers follow, obedient and comforting, promising a world that can be counted. Yet exhaustion wins gradually, not dramatically, but by erosion. Your head dips, rises, dips again. The teacher glances your way kindly, understanding. Mainstream historians note that dropout rates were high, fatigue the greatest enemy of learning. A quirky tidbit claims one school experimented with standing lessons to keep students awake, abandoned after several fainted. Historians still argue whether perseverance or opportunity mattered more. When the lesson ends, you stand slowly, joints protesting, mind pleasantly numb. You thank the teacher, tuck your slate under your arm, and step back into the night, feeling both proud and impossibly tired. The walk home feels longer now. Streets emptier, lamps flickering sleepily. You yawn again, heroic and futile, and imagine your mattress waiting like a loyal friend. Back inside, you undress quietly, slide into your place among your brothers, and sigh as the straw accepts you. The room is dark, breaths already deep, stories done for the night. Historians still argue whether night schooling changed lives in measurable ways. Lying here, eyes closing at last, you think perhaps it changed something smaller and just as important, the way you imagine your future. Tomorrow, the machines will claim you again. But tonight, you have claimed a few letters, a few numbers, a few minutes of possibility. Sleep finally takes you, gentle and complete. Morning returns with its usual lack of ceremony, but something is missing today, and you notice it before you can name it. The room stirs, breaths shifting, blankets rustling, but one space near the wall remains oddly still. Your eyes drift there half awake, and you realize your youngest brother is not breathing in rhythm with the rest. You sit up slowly, heart already tightening, and reach out to touch his shoulder. Warm, good, but his face is pale, eyes closed too tightly, brow faintly damp. He murmurs something unintelligible, then coughs deep and hollow, the sound echoing unpleasantly in the small room. Mainstream historians note that illness was a constant companion of industrial life, with respiratory infections, fevers and injuries common among workers. A quirky tidbit claims one mill doctor diagnosed everything from broken bones to heartbreak as overwork, which is impressively efficient. Historians still argue whether poor health stemmed more from workplace conditions or crowded living, but standing here, you suspect the two cooperated enthusiastically. Your mother is awake instantly, the way parents become experts at hearing trouble. She kneels beside him, pressing a hand to his forehead, lips pursed in quiet calculation. Fever, she decides, or at least something close enough to be unwelcome. Stay home today, she whispers, firm and gentle. Your brother protests weakly because missing work means missing wages, and missing wages means thinner suppers. You add your voice, soft but insistent. One day, you say, better than 10. He nods reluctantly, surrendering, relief and worry mingling on his face. You help settle him more comfortably, tucking the blanket tighter, offering the apple you saved last night. He manages a small smile. Joke number 1 surfaces when he croaks, "Tell the machine I'm on holiday," and you reply, "It'll be jealous," earning a faint chuckle that turns into a cough. Humor, even sick, remains stubborn. The rest of you prepare to leave, quieter than usual. Absence changes the room's geometry, a missing shape you keep glancing toward. Mainstream accounts record that illness often forced families to juggle roles, siblings covering shifts when possible. A fringe rumor claims one boy once worked 3 consecutive shifts to cover for sick brothers, which sounds heroic and medically ill-advised. Historians still argue whether such substitutions helped families or simply hastened collapse. At the factory, you feel the absence more sharply. The youngest station stands empty, a foreman already frowning at the gap. Explanations are brief, accepted with visible impatience. Productivity here dislikes sympathy. You work harder today, unconsciously filling silence with motion. Every cough you hear sounds louder than usual, every wheeze a warning. You think about lungs, about dust, about the thin line between worker and patient. Joke number 2 arrives when your eldest whispers, if he recovers too fast, we'll accuse him of malingering, And you reply, only if he brings proof, which earns a smile. Teasing as reassurance, news travels fast. By mid-morning, you hear about another man sent home dizzy, a woman fainting near the looms. Mainstream records show that outbreaks could sweep through factories quickly, forcing temporary closures or mass absences. A quirky tidbit claims one supervisor blamed bad air on moral weakness, which is impressively useless. Historians still argue whether employers recognized epidemics early enough to matter. You worry through the hours, counting time not in bells but in imagined fevers. At break, you trade your extra bread for a small bottle of syrup from a co-worker whose aunt sells remedies. The label promises miracles. You accept modest expectations. Joke number 3 surfaces when you whisper, "If this cures everything, we'll patent it." And your brother replies, "First we test it on foreman," which makes you grin. Medical ethics, factory edition. When the shift ends, you hurry home faster than usual, steps urgent, mind racing ahead. The stairwell smells faintly of vinegar and herbs, which is both hopeful and alarming. Inside, you find your youngest brother propped against pillows, cheeks flushed, eyes brighter than morning. Fever still there, but steadier. You offer the syrup, spooning it carefully, ignoring the taste yourself. He grimaces, then sighs contentedly, because bitterness apparently signals healing. Your mother nods approvingly, already planning broth. Mainstream historians note that many workers relied on home remedies and community healers, formal medicine often too expensive or distant. A fringe rumor claims one healer cured coughs with roasted onions tied to chests, which sounds uncomfortable but sincere. Historians still argue whether such treatments helped or merely comforted. Watching your brother relax slightly, you think comfort alone has value. Evening unfolds gently, quieter than usual. Stories soften, jokes subdued. You take an extra turn fetching water, an extra moment by his side, listening to his breathing, counting its steadiness. Absence lingers in small ways. One fewer laugh, one fewer elbow in bed. Yet there is also presence, care, attention, family moving subtly to compensate. Historians still argue whether families or institutions bore the true burden of industrial illness. Sitting here, you think families did, silently, patiently, without records. By night, his fever dips a little. Relief spreads cautiously like dawn. You settle into your place, tired but lighter, aware how fragile routines truly are. Tomorrow he may return to machines, or he may not. Either way, you will adjust as you always do. Tonight, illness has visited and not yet claimed, and in this small victory, you find gratitude deep enough to carry you into sleep. Sunday arrives with a gentler voice than any bell you know. No whistle tears the air before dawn, no foreman's shadow crosses your dreams. You wake instead to quiet light slipping through grime-streaked glass, to birds daring to sing between chimneys, to the rare luxury of realizing you are not late for anything. The room stirs slowly, indulgently. Your youngest brother breathes easier now, fever mostly gone. Cheeks still pink but eyes clearer. You smile at the sight, relief settling deeper into you than any rest. Mainstream historians note that Sundays were often the only regular respite for industrial workers, protected by custom and, later, law. A quirky tidbit claims one factory briefly considered Sunday shifts to boost output, abandoned after workers collectively pretended not to hear the proposal. Historians still argue whether the Sabbath truly rested bodies or merely postponed fatigue. You stretch carefully, joints creaking like polite old men, and sit up without urgency. Time feels wider today, elastic, generous. Even the ceiling cracks seem less demanding. Breakfast is slower, warmer. Someone has managed a small piece of meat, which becomes the centerpiece of the table, sliced reverently thin. Conversation flows more easily, laughter louder, shoulders looser. Mainstream accounts describe Sunday meals as symbolic feasts, modest but meaningful. A fringe rumor claims one family saved bones all week to make a truly heroic broth on Sundays, which sounds both thrifty and triumphant. Joke number 1 arrives when your father examines the meat and says, "Careful, this might be endangered." And you reply, "We'll protect it with bread," earning a round of smiles. Conservation domestic style. After eating, you linger, something you never do on workdays. The room feels almost spacious when no one is rushing out the door. You notice details usually invisible: a loose nail in the floor, a faded chalk mark on the wall, the pattern of soot on the window that looks faintly like a map of nowhere. Outside, the neighborhood wakes slowly too. Shops open late, voices softer, carts fewer. People dress a little better, collars straighter, boots cleaner. Mainstream historians note that Sunday attire was often the only chance to display dignity beyond work clothes. A quirky tidbit claims one boy polished his boots so enthusiastically he slid the entire way to church, arriving both early and horizontal. Historians still argue whether such rituals reinforced social order or offered genuine pride. You walk with your brothers toward the common green. Not quite church-bound today, simply wandering. The air feels different, lighter, almost friendly. Children run freely, hoops clattering, laughter ringing without fear of bells. You sit on a low wall, letting sun warm your face, eyes half closed. Joke number 2 surfaces when your youngest brother, still weak, declares, "If every day were Sunday, I'd survive to old age." And you reply, "Would starve by Tuesday," which earns a laugh. Utopian planning, briefly attempted. You watch men gather to argue politics near a bench, voices animated but relaxed. Women trade news and recipes, nodding knowingly. Someone plays a fiddle badly but enthusiastically. Mainstream accounts describe such gatherings as the social glue of working class life. A fringe rumor claims one Sunday concert once drowned out a factory whistle, delaying a shift by accident, which sounds like an act of accidental rebellion. Historians still argue whether leisure strengthened solidarity or merely distracted from injustice. You think about the coming week, about machines waiting patiently, about dust and bells and hierarchy. The thought does not crush you today. Sunday has softened its edges. In the afternoon, you help your mother with washing, hauling water, wringing cloth. Even chores feel kinder without the clock's glare. You chat easily, sharing plans, speculations, small dreams. Mainstream historians note that domestic labor filled Sundays as much as rest did, but in a different key. A quirky tidbit claims one family invented a game counting how many socks vanished each week, awarding prizes for theories. Historians still argue whether humor here masked exhaustion or celebrated resilience. Joke number 3 arrives when you lose a sock in the tub and declare, "It's joined the factory," and your mother replies, "Then it owes us wages," which makes you laugh. Textile unions, domestic branch. As evening approaches, you sit again, watching clouds drift between chimneys, imagining they are mountains, oceans, anywhere but here. You talk quietly with your brothers about futures, apprenticeships, better rooms, maybe even shops of your own. Dreams stretch cautiously, careful not to break. Historians still argue whether Sundays truly offered recovery or simply a psychological pause. Sitting here, you think the pause alone matters. It reminds you that life has other tempos. When dusk falls, lamps glow gently, and families retreat indoors, satisfied in a quiet way that work rarely provides. You return home, body rested not fully but enough, spirit lighter, lungs grateful for a day of cleaner air. Tonight, sleep comes faster, deeper. Tomorrow, the bells will call again. But Sunday has given you something precious and rarer, the memory of unmeasured hours. And that memory will carry you, quietly, back into the grind. Monday returns without apology, but something from Sunday lingers, a faint aftertaste of freedom that refuses to vanish completely. You wake before the whistle, lying still for a moment, listening to the room breathe, savoring the last scraps of unmeasured time before duty reclaims you. As you dress, your thoughts drift to yesterday's conversations, the politics near the bench, the careless laughter, the dreams spoken cautiously into warm air. Today, those thoughts follow you to work, quiet companions in the march back toward smoke and brick. Mainstream historians note that religion and moral instruction played a central role in Victorian working class life, often encouraged by employers who believed faith improved punctuality. A quirky tidbit claims one factory owner installed a pulpit in the break room, abandoned after sermons ran longer than lunch. Historians still argue whether faith served primarily as comfort or control. On the walk to the mill, you pass the church doors still faintly scented with wax and incense. Bells hang silent now, resting from their Sunday labors. You think about sermons you have half heard, about duty, patience, reward in another life. The words resurface unexpectedly as you trudge through puddles and soot. Joke number 1 arrives when your brother mutters, "If heaven has machines, I'm reconsidering." And you reply, "At least they'll be quiet," earning a grin. Eternal noise management. Inside the factory, the machines greet you with familiar hunger. The dust hour will come, the hierarchy will assert itself, the bells will divide your day into obedient pieces. Yet today, sermons echo faintly in your head, phrases about endurance, fairness, divine order. You watch a foreman scold a boy harshly for a small mistake, voice cutting, patience thin. The boy nods, eyes down, swallowing pride. A verse from Sunday flickers through your mind, something about gentleness, justice. The contrast stings. Historians still argue whether religious teaching encouraged workers to accept injustice or inspired them to challenge it. Standing here, you suspect it did both, depending on which lines one remembered. At break, a small group gathers near the wall, quietly debating last night's sermon. One man insists the preacher meant obedience to God, not to bosses. Another shrugs, saying obedience is obedience, whichever direction you face. Mainstream accounts note that chapels often became spaces for early labor organizing as well as moral instruction. A fringe rumor claims one radical hymn hid protest lyrics in its second verse, which sounds plausible and delightful. Historians still argue how much reform grew from pulpits versus pubs. You listen more than speak, absorbing arguments like you absorb dust. Faith, you realize, is another tool here, sometimes shield, sometimes chain. You think about your youngest brother's fever, about how prayers accompanied syrup and broth, about how comfort arrived in human hands more than divine ones. Joke number 2 surfaces when your brother whispers, "If sermons cured coughs, we'd all be immortal." And you reply, "They cure boredom at least," earning a soft chuckle. Spiritual Healthcare Limited Edition. As afternoon unfolds, you find yourself thinking more critically than usual. When the foreman praises output but ignores safety, you feel a quiet disagreement take shape. When wages are mentioned in passing, you calculate fairness more sharply. Sunday's pause has sharpened your sense of contrast. Historians still argue whether moral instruction heightened class awareness or blunted it. From your vantage, it plants questions. And questions here are the first dangerous luxury. You overhear 2 men planning to attend a chapel meeting about worker rights later in the week. The phrase, "collective petition," drifts by like a seed. You file it away, unsure what you will do with it. Joke number 3 arrives when the youngest brother whispers, "If we petition, can we petition for softer dust?" And you reply, "That's revolutionary," earning a grin. Reform begins with lungs. As the day wears on, faith and doubt mingle comfortably in your thoughts. You remember hymns about light, imagine it filtering through soot, stubborn but persistent. You remember sermons about patience, then recall how patience often means waiting for someone else to change. Historians still argue whether Victorian religion delayed labor reform or helped nurture it. Watching your brother's work, you think belief is not the deciding factor. Courage is. By evening, fatigue reasserts itself, practical and persuasive. The day ends as it always does, with bells, discipline, dust. Yet something inside you feels slightly rearranged, as if Sunday's quiet and Monday's sermons have shifted a piece of your thinking. On the walk home, you talk with your brothers about faith, about fairness, about whether heaven has foremen. The conversation wanders gently, unresolved but alive. Home greets you with warmth and routine. grounding speculation in soup and mending and laughter. You realize that whatever you believe, whatever you doubt, your truest faith lies here, in people who share your bed space, your bread, your burdens. Historians still argue whether duty or doubt shaped the working class more deeply. Sitting now, loosening boots, you think it was the constant balancing of both. Tomorrow you will work again, unquestioningly in motion, quietly questioning in mind. And somewhere between hymns and hammers, you are beginning to form ideas that do not fit neatly into sermons or schedules. The idea does not announce itself loudly. It arrives as a whisper between machines, a pause too deliberate, a glance that lingers longer than habit allows. You sense it before you hear it, the way you sense weather shifting before rain. Today, the factory hums as always, but beneath the noise runs a quieter current. Men cluster slightly closer at break. Conversations tilt away when foremen pass. Names are spoken in half voices, plans in fragments, something is forming. Mainstream historians record that early labor organization in Victorian factories often began informally, through whispered agreements and cautious meetings. A quirky tidbit claims one group disguised planning sessions as chess games, though no one could actually play chess, which suggests strategy was flexible. Historians still argue whether strikes emerged from sudden outrage or long, patient plotting. You notice your eldest brother being drawn aside by an older worker you respect, a man with steady hands and careful eyes. They speak briefly, nod, separate. When your brother returns, his expression is thoughtful, guarded. "What was that about?" You ask quietly. "Nothing." He says, then amends, "Not nothing, just talk." Joke number one surfaces when you whisper, "If it's secret, you have to tell me dramatically," and he replies, "If I do, we'll both be unemployed," which ends the joke neatly. Confidential comedy. At break, a folded paper appears in your brother's pocket, edges soft from many hands. He does not open it here. He does not need to. You recognize the weight of it, heavier than ink should be. Mainstream accounts note that early strike planning often involved handwritten petitions or lists of demands, circulated discreetly to avoid retaliation. A fringe rumor claims one list was hidden inside a loaf of bread, which sounds deliciously rebellious. Historians still argue whether secrecy or openness proved more effective in early movements. Your youngest brother notices the paper too, eyes widening slightly. "What's that?" he mouths. "Homework." Your eldest mouths back, which is both untrue and oddly appropriate. As the hours pass, you become more aware of patterns. Certain men linger after shifts. Certain women exchange nods that carry weight. The phrase, "Wednesday evening," surfaces repeatedly, detached from context but rich with implication. Joke number two arrives when your youngest whispers, "If everyone meets Wednesday, who runs the machines?" And you reply, "They'll finally get a rest," earning a grin. Mechanical holidays. Fear rides close behind excitement. You have seen men dismissed for less than a raised eyebrow. Mainstream historians document how employers often fired suspected organizers swiftly, sometimes blacklisting them across entire districts. A quirky tidbit claims one factory kept a literal bad list, nailed behind the office door, which sounds medieval and unfortunately plausible. Historians still argue whether repression slowed reform or merely sharpened resolve. You think about wages, about dust, about your brother's fever, about sermons on justice. The pieces begin to arrange themselves into a picture you did not consciously assemble. At lunch, the older worker finally approaches you. His voice is low, his words careful. "Some of us are talking," he says, as if discussing weather, about hours, about safety, about pay that matches fingers kept. You nod slowly, heart thudding. "Talking where?" "After dark, near the pump." If you're interested, the word feels small for what it carries. Joke number three surfaces nervously when you reply, "If this is about a choir, I'm a terrible singer," and he smiles thinly. "No hymns tonight," he says. "Just lists." That evening, you walk home with your brothers in thoughtful silence. The city seems different now, every shadow a potential witness, every doorway a possible meeting place. You glance at faces, wondering who knows, who waits, who fears. At supper, the folded paper appears again, smoothed discreetly, then hidden beneath a plate. Your mother notices, of course. She notices everything, but says nothing, merely serving an extra ladle of broth with quiet significance. After eating, your eldest finally unfolds the paper for you and the youngest, careful, reverent. Names written neatly. A short list of demands: shorter hours on Saturdays, guards on certain machines, a half-penny raise. Modest things, astonishing things. Mainstream historians note that early demands were often practical rather than radical, focused on safety and hours more than ideology. A fringe rumor claims one list included more windows, which is charming and perfectly reasonable. Historians still argue whether moderation helped or hindered progress. Do we sign? The youngest whispers, eyes shining with fear and excitement. Your eldest hesitates. If we do, they might know. If we don't, nothing changes. The room feels suddenly smaller. You think about the boy scolded yesterday, about lungs full of dust, about Sundays that vanish too quickly. You take the stub of a pencil, hands trembling slightly, and sign. The mark looks small, insignificant. It feels enormous. Later, near the pump, you join a loose ring of workers under flickering lamplight. Faces familiar, voices cautious. Plans are discussed in fragments. Who will speak? Who will collect? Who will warn if foremen approach? Mainstream accounts describe such meetings as fragile, often broken up by spies or fear. A quirky tidbit claims one group used a baby's crying as a signal to disperse, which sounds effective and very loud. Historians still argue whether early strikes succeeded because of unity or despite it. Standing here, you think unity is harder than any machine you have learned to master. Names are added, risks weighed. Someone mentions families, mouths to feed, rents due. Silence follows, heavy but determined. When the meeting ends, you walk home with your brothers, nerves buzzing, hearts strangely light. You have not struck yet. You have not shouted or marched. But you have chosen. Joke number 4, because nerves demand extra, slips out when your youngest whispers, "If we're arrested, can I call in sick?" And you reply, "Only if they believe in fevers," earning a soft laugh. Revolutionary healthcare. In bed, sleep comes slowly. Thoughts race, foremen's faces, lists discovered, machines silent, wages changed. Historians still argue whether strikes were born more from desperation or hope. Lying here, you realize it is both. Tomorrow you will work as usual, hands steady, eyes careful. Nothing visible will change. But beneath the noise, beneath the dust, something has begun. And for the first time since you first touched a machine, you feel not only endured by history, but quietly shaping it. The days that follow carry a new weight, subtle but constant, like a coin tucked into your boot that you cannot remove. Outwardly, nothing changes. The bells ring, the machines roar, foremen pace. You guide fibers, clear jams, breathe dust. Yet beneath every movement runs a second rhythm, quieter and more deliberate. You are growing into the grind, but now the grind grows around you too. Mainstream historians often describe long-term factory work as physically shaping laborers, altering posture, gait, even facial expression. A quirky tidbit claims one doctor could identify a spinner from 50 paces by shoulder angle alone, which sounds plausible when you notice how everyone here leans slightly forward, as if forever bowing to invisible machines. Historians still argue whether such bodily changes were adaptation or slow injury. You feel it in yourself. Your hands are tougher now, skin thickened into reliable shields. Your timing has sharpened. You anticipate jams before they happen. Hear belt trouble before it screams. Movements that once required thought now unfold automatically, like breathing. Joke number 1 surfaces when your brother watches you work and whispers, "Cheerful, you're becoming professional," and you reply, "I'll deny everything," which earns a grin. Identity management, advanced level. The foreman noticed too. You receive fewer corrections, more nods. Once you are asked to show a newer boy how to adjust tension properly. Teaching feels strange and satisfying, like discovering a new muscle. Mainstream accounts note that informal mentorship often replaced formal training, passing skill quietly between generations. A fringe rumor claims one apprentice learned so well he eventually redesigned a machine and was promptly fired for ambition. Historians still argue whether innovation was welcomed or feared. You are more valuable now, and that realization cuts both ways. At break, whispers continue. Lists circulate more slowly now, carefully hidden inside caps, inside sleeves, inside jokes. No one mentions strike aloud. The word lives in eyes and nods and silences. Mainstream historians record that tension often built gradually before any open action, workers testing resolve without revealing strength. A quirky tidbit claims one group practiced, standing silently for an hour as rehearsal, which sounds both disciplined and deeply awkward. Historians still argue whether patience or spontaneity proved more effective. You feel yourself changing too, not only in skill but in expectation. Once, survival alone felt ambitious. Now, you catch yourself imagining small improvements: a guarded belt, a shorter Saturday, lungs that last past 40. These thoughts do not vanish when bells ring. Joke number 2 arrives when your youngest brother whispers, "If we win anything, I'm buying socks first." And you reply, "Luxury corrupts," which earns a laugh. Revolutionary shopping lists. Physically, the grind claims you steadily. Your backache is differently now, deeper, more specific. Your wrists complain in the morning, stiff until warmed by motion. Mainstream historians note that cumulative injuries were common, often invisible until too late. A fringe rumor claims one man's joints predicted weather more accurately than newspapers, which sounds useful but tragic. Historians still argue whether early retirement due to injury was rare or merely undocumented. You notice older workers more now, studying their movements, their breathing, their eyes. Some still move with grace, others shuffle, wheeze, lean heavily on frames. Futures displayed openly. The youngest recovers fully and returns to work, pride restored, fever forgotten. He boasts about surviving illness like a veteran. You tease him gently, grateful beyond words. Family resilience, again, feels like your greatest wealth. Joke number 3 surfaces when he declares, "If sickness can't stop me, machines won't either." And you reply, "Machines are more organized," which earns a snort. Strategic pessimism. As weeks pass, the list grows longer. So does fear. One man disappears abruptly, rumored dismissed for attitude. Another transfers without explanation. You read signs obsessively now, interpreting glances, measuring moods. Mainstream accounts note that pre-strike periods were often marked by heightened surveillance and paranoia. A quirky tidbit claims one factory trained a supervisor to lip read, which sounds cinematic but unsettling. Historians still argue how common espionage truly was. Despite this, resolve hardens quietly. You feel it in conversations that no longer trail off nervously, in jokes that carry sharper edges, in how men stand a little straighter when foremen pass. You, meanwhile, settle deeper into your role. You work efficiently, reliably, earning trust that shields you slightly. This position feels precarious. You wonder sometimes whether leadership means standing closer to danger. Historians still argue whether skilled workers led early reforms or resisted them to protect status. Standing here, you think skill gives you courage, not caution. You know what machines can do. You know what they cost. One afternoon, during dust hour, you catch yourself thinking not about endurance, but about alternatives. About shops, about tools of your own, about learning enough letters and numbers to manage rather than obey. The thought startles you with its audacity. Joke number 4 slips out when you whisper to your brother, "If I ever own a factory, remind me to install windows." And he replies, "I'll remind you to retire first," earning a grin. Entrepreneurial fantasy, responsibly postponed. By the time another Sunday approaches, you realize something quietly astonishing. The grind has not crushed your ambition. It has shaped it. You are stronger now, sharper, more aware. You move through the factory not as a frightened boy, but as a worker who understands systems, dangers, and possibilities. Historians still argue whether industrial labor inevitably deadened dreams. Standing here, hands steady on the frame, you think dreams simply adapt, growing smaller, tougher, harder to kill. The machines still dominate your days, the dust still claims your breath. The hierarchy still rules, but now, beneath endurance, beneath routine, beneath fatigue, something else grows with equal patience. Expectation. An expectation, you are beginning to understand, is where change starts. Expectation has a strange effect on the way you see the world. It sharpens edges, brightens possibilities, stretches horizons just enough to let light through. You still walk the same streets, touch the same machines, breathe the same dust, but now you notice what lies just beyond them. The chimneys no longer feel like the whole skyline. Mainstream historians often note that many Victorian workers never left their neighborhoods, entire lives contained within a few square miles. A quirky tidbit claims one spinner once traveled 3 streets farther than usual and described it for weeks as abroad, which sounds funny until you realize how rare distance truly was. Historians still argue whether immobility shaped loyalty or simply limited imagination. You find your imagination growing anyway. On the walk to work, you begin looking past the factory, past the next row of brick, past the river's brown surface. You notice railway posters promising towns with green names and cheaper rents. You overhear men talking about new mills opening upriver, about workshops needing skilled hands. The city, once a cage, starts to resemble a map. Joke number 1 surfaces when your youngest brother points at a train puffing past and says, "That's someone else's escape." And you reply, "Or someone else's overtime," which earns a grin. Transportation, optimistically misinterpreted. Inside the factory, your growing skill brings small privileges. You are trusted to run a faster frame alone. Once, a supervisor asks your opinion about a belt alignment, and you offer it calmly, correctly. The belt improves. The supervisor nods. Mainstream accounts note that experienced workers sometimes gained informal influence, though rarely formal authority. A fringe rumor claims one operator once negotiated his own hours, which sounds mythical and deeply inspiring. Historians still argue how often upward mobility truly occurred. You begin to imagine paths that do not end exactly where you stand. At break, conversations drift toward futures. One man speaks of saving enough to open a cobbler's stall. Another dreams of emigrating, America shining faintly in his voice like a distant star. Mainstream historians record waves of industrial migration driven by both desperation and hope. A quirky tidbit claims one emigrant packed an entire loom in his trunk, which sounds heavy and symbolic. Historians still argue whether such moves improved lives or merely shifted hardships. You listen carefully. You calculate quietly. Wages, rent, bread, coal. Night school letters still float in your memory, chalk shapes that promise doors. Joke number 2 arrives when your brother whispers, "If we leave London, will the dust follow?" And you reply, "Only if it loves us," which earns a laugh. Industrial loyalty, eternal addition. The strike whispers continue too, steadier now, more confident. No action yet, but planning grows more detailed, which foreman to avoid, which machines to idle first, who will speak, who will warn families. Mainstream historians note that anticipation often reshaped workers' sense of power before any confrontation occurred. A fringe rumor claims one factory strike succeeded simply because everyone agreed silently to stop at once, which sounds miraculous and terrifying. Historians still argue whether leadership or timing mattered more. You imagine 2 futures unfolding side by side. In one, the strike works shorter hours, safer belts, better pay. In the other, it fails dismissals, hunger, searching for work with a quiet, humiliating patience. Both futures feel equally real. Physically, you feel yourself reaching a plateau. Your strength is steady now, your endurance reliable. The grind no longer surprises you. This stability, oddly, gives you space to think beyond it. You watch an older man struggle to lift a tool he once tossed easily. His eyes flick briefly toward you, then away. Mainstream accounts note that aging workers often faced silent demotion or dismissal. A quirky tidbit claims one man trained his replacement personally so he could retire with dignity, which sounds noble and rare. Historians still argue whether industry honored experience or discarded it. You promise yourself, quietly, that you will not let the machines decide everything about your ending. Joke number 3 surfaces when you whisper to your brother, "If I make it to 40, I'm throwing a party," and he replies, "If we make it to 40, we'll nap through it," which earns a grin. Long-term planning, realistically scaled, evenings now feel different. After supper, you linger by the door sometimes, listening to distant trains, imagining destinations. You practice writing your name more neatly, just in case it needs to appear on something more important than a wage list. You ask the night teacher about bookkeeping, about trades that need numbers more than hands. Mainstream historians note that some workers used night education strategically, aiming for clerical or supervisory roles. A fringe rumor claims one spinner became a factory owner within 20 years, which sounds like a parable more than a statistic. Historians still argue how often such stories truly happened. You do not expect miracles, but you begin to expect movement. The factory still dominates your days, but it no longer dominates your entire imagination. That feels revolutionary in a quiet, personal way. One evening, walking home, you pause on a bridge and look down at the river, sluggish and brown, carrying away scraps, secrets, reflections. You wonder where it ends. You wonder whether you might one day follow it. Expectation settles into you now, not as restlessness, but as direction. Historians still argue whether hope was a luxury for industrial workers or a necessity. Standing here watching water drift under smoke, you decide it is both. Tomorrow you will work again. You will plan, whisper, endure, save, learn. But tonight, looking beyond the chimneys, beyond the mill, beyond the street that has always defined you, you allow yourself a rare and daring thought: your life may not end exactly where it began. And that thought, gentle and persistent, carries you all the way home. The final evening of this long remembering arrives quietly, without banners or bells, the way most important moments do in your life. You walk home from the mill beneath a sky that has decided, just for once, to show you a faint scatter of stars between drifting smoke. They are dim, uncertain, but unmistakably there. You move more slowly tonight, not from fatigue alone, but from awareness. Each step feels deliberate, as if you are walking not only through streets, but through years. The puddles reflect lamplight and chimney and the shape of you, older now than when this story began, steadier, more deliberate, carrying more inside than you did at dawn on that first morning. Mainstream historians often note that many industrial workers measured time not in years but in shifts, illnesses, and promotions. A quirky tidbit claims one man marked his age by counting foremen instead of birthdays, which sounds both efficient and bleak. Historians still argue whether workers felt history passing or simply endured it. You think back through the days you have lived here. The first bell, the first jam cleared without shaking, the rivalry that softened into respect, the fever that frightened you, the list that made your hands tremble, the thought of trains, rivers, futures that stretch beyond brick. Joke number 1 surfaces gently when your brother beside you says, "If we ever leave this street, I'll get lost immediately." And you reply, "That's how adventures start," earning a smile. Navigation optimistically redefined. Home greets you as always, with warmth earned from coal you carried, with voices shaped by years of closeness, with the familiar choreography of supper and settling. Yet tonight feels different, not dramatic, just fuller. You notice more. The sound of laughter, the patience in your mother's hands, the quiet strength in your brother's shoulders. Mainstream accounts note that family stability often anchored workers amid rapid social change. A fringe rumor claims one sociologist called such households emotional factories, which sounds absurd but strangely accurate. Historians still argue whether family protected workers from exploitation or merely helped them survive it. After eating, you linger longer than usual, not eager for sleep yet. You talk softly about plans, night classes, savings, the Wednesday meetings, rumors of safer mills upriver. No one promises anything. No one demands certainty. But the talk itself feels like progress. Joke number 2 arrives when your youngest brother says, "If we change the world, I'm demanding softer floors first," and you reply, "I'll campaign for quieter machines," which earns a ripple of laughter. Revolutionary priorities, sensibly arranged. Later, you prepare for bed as you have 100 times, folding clothes, stacking boots, settling into your narrow space. The room dims, breaths synchronize, and quiet grows comfortable again. This time, though, you let your thoughts wander freely. You picture yourself years from now, hands still strong, perhaps running a small workshop, perhaps teaching an apprentice, perhaps writing numbers in a ledger instead of guiding fibers through teeth. You picture your brothers beside you, paths diverging slightly but never fully separating. Mainstream historians still argue whether industrial workers truly believed in progress or simply adapted to change. Lying here, you think belief is quieter than speeches make it sound. It lives in small decisions: signing a list, attending a class, saving a penny, imagining a river's end. Joke number 3 arrives in your own thoughts when you imagine telling your future self, "At least you survived this," and your future self replying, "Barely, but with style." Temporal sarcasm, surprisingly comforting. The factory still waits for you tomorrow. The dust will still fall. The bells will still divide your hours. Foremen will still pace. Wages will still be counted carefully. But you are no longer only enduring. You are learning. You are choosing. You are watching beyond the chimneys. Historians still argue whether individual lives mattered in the vast machinery of the Industrial Revolution. Lying here, listening to familiar breathing, you decide that in the quiet rooms, in the shared beds, in the whispered plans and small hopes, history lived very personally indeed. Your eyes grow heavy now, the long day finally claiming its due. Thoughts slow, soft and drift. The stars outside fade behind clouds. The city murmurs on, tireless, vast, indifferent. And you, a Victorian brother worker, shaped by noise and dust and family and quiet courage, settle gently into sleep. Not as a hero, not as a victim, but as someone who lived, worked, learned, hoped, and belonged. The room grows still around you. Breathing deepens, steady and slow. The sounds of the city soften into distant waves. Your thoughts loosen, floating free of machines, free of lists, free of plans. Tomorrow will come when it comes. For now, there is only warmth and darkness, and the gentle comfort of being held by familiar walls and familiar lives. Let your shoulders relax. Let your hands unclench. Let the long years of dust and bells drift quietly away. You are safe here. You are resting. You have done enough for today. Sleep settles over you like a soft blanket, unhurried, kind. The factory fades. The street fades. Even the stars fade. And in the quiet that remains, you simply breathe and drift and rest,